right, please rise for silent invocation followed by pledge of allegiance. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, call the roll.
Councilman Foley? Councilman Gepfer?
Yes.
Councilman Green?
Here.
Vice Mayor Grubbs?
Here.
Mayor Stiltner?
Yes, and here, and Councilman Foley should be here momentarily, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So, just a couple brief comments of what we're going to be doing tonight. First of all, appreciate everybody coming out. I hope that tonight will be very informative and will answer a lot of questions that many of us have. So in the state of Florida, if you're not familiar, there is this thing called government in the sunshine. And conceptually what that means is issues that are going to come before the municipal elected body to be voted on and carried forward and executed out have to be discussed in public and open forum. This particular workshop that we're about to go through tonight contains a very comprehensive study that was commissioned by the previous city council after Hurricane Ian. And so we have individually had opportunities to talk about this with Kimberly Horn. Thank you very much for being here tonight, by the way. In city staff, but amongst ourselves, we have not had that opportunity. So that is the primary focus for that tonight. What you're going to be hearing about tonight are ultimately solutions that the council can look at and take action on to try to put our city in a much better position to handle extreme flood situations like we have seen in the last couple of years. I encourage you to take notes. You may have questions you want to email us later after the meeting tonight. I think some of our critical staff folks are going to stay around. I will stay around. The city manager is going to touch on additional meetings that are going to occur after this, where they're going to be more geographically specific to neighborhoods and areas heavily impacted where there's a designated project that's been identified and modeled. So I hope that kind of makes sense. So those are going to be good meetings for really detailed X's and O's and lots of close contact and communication with our staff. For council tonight, gentlemen, I encourage, ask a lot of questions, okay? Even if you already know the answer, a lot of good questions can still be asked so the information can be out there. I know our city engineer tonight is planning on sticking around and going through as much detail and information and questions that you guys have. So I encourage, ask a lot of questions. Try to be as clear about the information you're asking and the whys and all that kind of stuff. I'm also going to be challenging each of you as we learn more about these projects in these specific areas is to be very, very closely familiar with the ones that are in your district. And we'll all know a lot about all of them, but specifically the ones in your district, because I think those residents are going to have lots and lots of follow-up questions, which is a good thing. Typically when we have meetings like this and they run a little bit long, we see a tendency of folks have gotten a little bit of information, they got other things to do, and they get up and leave. So preemptively, I just want to say this tonight, that if you have questions and you haven't heard the answer, or you have something specific, our business cards are out on the podium right there in the lobby. I've also made numerous sheets with some really important email contacts. And the one thing I would ask you guys to do tonight to help us collectively as a city is, and the city manager is going to touch on it here in a little bit, but there is a project that we have carried forward to Tallahassee. We were actually up in Tallahassee a couple weeks ago. One of these projects that we're going to talk about tonight that has a heavy funding mechanism that needs to be funded in order for us to execute the project. We're going to get into the details, so I don't want to spoil the good news that we know we can help a lot of residents with one single project, but it's got to get funded. And so we've carried this project forward specifically to Tallahassee, and we have a state senator, Senator Tom Wright. He is sponsoring the appropriations and he is doing the lifting on his side, and we have a House Representative, Chase Tremont, on the other side. It would mean a lot to take a moment to take those sheets out there and email those two folks and just send them positive words of praise. We appreciate you putting this high on your priority list. This means a lot to the city of Port Orange. They already know about the projects. We've already gone through the projects. They've had opportunities to interact with us. But there's a lot of competition in Tallahassee. So it means a lot to have them both as our representatives locally on both sides of the government aisle to put these as high priority as they can possibly be. I spoke with Representative Chase Tremont yesterday. He assured me, he said, Scott, this project for Port Orange is my #1 priority in Tallahassee. So that's what we want to hear. There's other email content on there, other state representatives that we think are key. Again, positive words of encouragement to support us, support these projects. It's easy for all of us to do, so please consider doing that. That information is right out there as well. All right.
Mr. Mayor, maybe
For the record,
maybe
you
let the people know who Kimberly Horn
Yep.
is.
I'm going to let the city manager touch on that.
Okay.
But if the record could reflect that District 1 Councilman Reed Foley is in attendance?
Apologize for being tardy.
Nope, you're good. So for some of our new council folks that maybe haven't been through a workshop, this is a little bit more informal than the normal council meetings. So we're not voting on anything tonight. We're not making any motions, all that kind of stuff. This is about us having open discussion and dialogue, answered as many questions so that we can continue to take that information and figure out what we want to do and how we want to execute this. We're going to get into a funding discussion later because all of these have to, none of them are free projects, right? So we'll get into the funding mechanism later, and that's where there's going to have to be some tough decisions. We're going to have to figure it out. This time I'm going to turn it over to our city manager, Wayne Clark, to start us off.
Thank you. As you said, our city engineer, Gino Reed, is going to lead the presentation tonight. He has been the project manager on the Stormwater Master Plan, as well as several other key projects that he'll go over in the presentation. And he or his staff will likely be the project managers of the physical construction of these projects as they move forward in time. So as he gets ready to get up here and go through the presentation, just want to make sure that we're all on the same page of what he's going to talk about. So there's two main components of his presentation. There's a background component that we think it's important before you start trying to solve problems that there's an understanding of where we're at now. So he's going to go over the existing stormwater system in the city as it exists today, a little bit on from as large as the regional drainage basins all the way down to creeks and ditches, who maintains them, who has ownership responsibility. He's going to also go through how they work. So most of our drainage system is gravity based, but we do have pumps in certain areas. So he's going to go over the system as it exists today. In addition to that, we're going to go over what we've talked about up here over the months since the storms, the root causes of the flooding, the main issues that we've seen. Related to that, he's going to talk about how our stormwater regulations have evolved and changed over time, the geography of Port Orange, where the areas are that are lower lying versus the other areas, and the rainfall history. He's going to touch on also the actions that are already ongoing to try to mitigate the flooding, to reduce the flooding. So there's those planning projects that are out there that are critical for us to become grant eligible. That gives us a lot of opportunity to get at money from the larger level governments, both the state and federal level, as well as it draws us regional cooperation. So some of these projects, as you'll see when he talks about the stormwater system, are beyond Port Orange. They're not, we have to work with other agencies, and the regional cooperation that comes from the planning efforts is how we know we're all working together and that people's projects aren't hurting each other but are helping each other going forward. In addition to that, he'll talk about just briefly some of the things that are out there, because some of the projects are solving large area issues, but there's also a lot of federal and state money going to individual homeowners through various FEMA programs, HUD programs, and things like that allow individuals to either elevate their homes or rebuild their homes, and in some cases they're going to sell the property and leave. But those programs are out there as well. So in addition to larger scale drainage projects, then there's these other options. That'll be the background. It takes about 20 minutes for him to get through that. And then the Stormwater Master Plan projects will come after that. Kimberly Horn, who we have hired to do that, he'll go through who they are and their background, but we picked them. They have done this. They're a very large company, and they have a lot of expertise in the area of stormwater and have done these kind of projects throughout the country. So he'll introduce the team as he goes forward with it. As you said, there's no votes tonight. There's no direction in formal manner. It's going to be a presentation of information. The plan itself was due to be completed in June. we were far enough along to know what the projects are. So when council said, can we go ahead and explain to the public what the projects are, where we look like we are, we're ready to do that. They'll be done with this in May. So what we're planning to do is, beginning in probably late May and going throughout the summer, is taking the individual projects and having a meeting. It'll probably be at Lakeside or somewhere like that. So you can come one-to-one, talk to people, and hear detailed questions about how it will affect you and your property. So that was the important part. If we tried to go through 9 projects tonight and you happen to live in Sleepy Hollow and that's project number 7, you get to listen to everybody ask questions about the other 6, and you may not care. So the idea is to break it out. So when we're going to talk about Sleepy Hollow, we're going to talk about Sleepy Hollow. And everybody that cares about Sleepy Hollow can come hear how it affects them individually. If you want to hear about Sugar Forest, Pepper Hill, and those areas, you can come to that project. You're welcome to come to every one of them if you want to, but we thought the personal attention to those project areas was the better way to go about making sure that everybody could come up and talk. This setting is not going to be as effective as being able to stand there and talk to one of the engineers and say, this is my house right here, how do you think that affects my house? Run the animations and do that. And the final thing before turning it over to Juno is, as you mentioned, some of the projects are already moving on. So the Cambridge project has been under design for a while. Juno will talk about that and its current status. And then the one you were mentioning earlier, the Sugar Forest, Madeline Pepper Hill, as we've been calling it, that project, last meeting you approved the design. So the design is already underway for that project, and that's the one that we were in Tallahassee asking for funding for. And as you mentioned, the House side of the budget, it's already been included in the House budget thanks to Representative Tremont's efforts to get it there. Getting the Senate side in there makes a big difference moving that forward. So those 2 are actually already started and underway. And with that, I'll turn it over to Juno to go through the presentation.
Juno, as you're coming up, Wayne, I just want to reiterate, and I want to make sure I don't forget to say thanks to Kimley Horn to come in ahead of time on the project, because when we were in Tallahassee, there is a big difference when you go to the state capitol and you're asking for funding on a project, and you can look at them and say, this project has been modeled. It will work. If you'll fund it or help us fund it, we know it will work. And that's not something they're used to hearing. Especially in past when technology just wasn't there. Projects go to Tallahassee and you're hopeful that that's going to work. And sometimes you spend a lot of money and they don't get you the result you're wanting. So having this kind of modeling we've already seen in Tallahassee is going to be to our benefit. So I just didn't want to forget to say thank you guys for coming in ahead of time on that, because we were able to utilize that information this funding year, which helps a lot. Good to see you, sir.
Good. Thank you, Mayor, Council. Juno Reed, City Engineer. Happy to be here tonight to give you this presentation. So these are just our meeting outcomes, and City Manager Wayne, he's already been through these, so I'll just skip to the next slide. So, as Manager indicated, we're going to start off tonight just kind of with a general overview of our stormwater system, starting with the larger, kind of going to the smaller, and where eventually that water goes. Won't spend a lot of time on it.
But Juno, I just want, I'm sorry.
Sure.
For one quick pause for council. If you say something and immediately in one of our minds, we want clarity. Are you okay with us pausing you for just and have you retouch on something?
Yeah, I think I would prefer it that way,
Okay.
so that it's fresh in everybody's mind.
Yeah.
If I use a term or if I say something that you guys don't understand, please by all means stop me, and I'm happy to provide additional
Okay, so
explanation.
we'll do that, and then when you get to the projects portions and you're going through individual projects, what I'm going to ask is after each project, give me a second to see if anybody has specific questions
Absolutely.
to that project. So
Happy to.
go ahead. Sorry.
So again, we're looking at a map of Volusia County, and the county has numerous what we call regional drainage basins in it, and specifically there's 4 of those basins that are here within Port Orange, and I'll pay it special note to 2 of them. We have the B19 Canal and the Nova Canal Basin. Those are 2 major drainage basins in the city that we're gonna touch on later on in the presentation. So next, we're going to talk about like some of the major drainage features in the city stormwater system, starting off with our stormwater ponds. As you can see, we have almost 600 ponds here in the city of Port Orange. Of that 600, the city maintains 136 of those, so less than 25% of the ponds in the city is actually responsible for maintaining. So as you can see, the majority or almost 75% of the ponds are maintained by private entities. Most of those are homeowners associations or like a property owners association for a big commercial project. So we rely a lot on those associations to properly maintain their systems. DOT also has a handful of ponds, and so does the county. Next, we'll talk about drainage ditches and canals together. So these are the anywhere from a big major canal like the B19 down to a small ditch, or the ditch like we see along Willow Run. 36.5 miles of those in the city. Of that 36.5 miles, the city has about 14 miles that we actively maintain, or just under 40%. With the county about the same number as us, and then the state, and then there's a little bit of a privately maintained canals as well. And then we go to the next one is what we call our major canals. These are the big open waterways that move a lot of water. The city has about 4.5 miles of those, about 30%. As you can see, the county has the majority of those major canals here in the city, primarily consisting of the B19, the B23, and then what's the extension of the Nova Canal is the Halifax Canal. And if I'll advance through here. So this is just another look at those kind of numbers, but broken out where it's city maintained versus kind of everybody else. And then we'll take a look at this map and see if I can get this to work here. Zoomed in nice. So as you can see on the map, everything in yellow is maintained by an entity other than the city, and everything in blue is maintained by the city. The larger boulder lines with the arrows, those are our major drainage canals, and then the smaller ones are the ditches, and then the ponds are the other entities you see. So as you can see, if you look at the canals and ditches overall, again, we maintain about 40% of those here in the city. Okay, so where does all the water go? So the water gets, from the ponds into the ditches, into the canals, into these major canals. And then when the water flows out of the city, we call that an outfall. So that's basically where water is going from a ditch or a canal out into a receiving water. So here in the city, we have 3 receiving waters. We have the Halifax River, we have Rose Bay, and we have Spruce Creek, which then flows into Strickland Bay. So 3 receiving waters for all of our outfalls. We have 2 types of outfalls in the city. We have gravity outfalls, where that's just what it is. It just takes the slope of the land and flows out via gravity. We also have pumped outfalls. So on the map, the gravity outfalls are indicated by a blue arrow. The pump station outfalls are indicated by a purple arrow. I'll zoom in a little bit on the map so we can see. Even though there are approximately the same number of purple arrows or pumped outfalls as there is gravity outfalls, as manager indicated, the vast majority of our water discharges via gravity systems. So we have one major pumping system, and that's our Cambridge system. The rest of our pumping systems are relatively small when compared to the major gravity outfalls we have.
Are all of the major outfalls one-way flow?
No. So
Okay.
the gravity outfalls
Can you explain
are.
that?
So these gravity outfalls, because they do discharge into tidally influenced waters. So the Halifax River, Rose Bay, Strickland Bay, up Spruce Creek, it is influenced by the tide. So if you have a high tide condition like a king tide or a tidal surge associated with a storm, it can actually physically push that water back up into those canals and basically, like you said, reverse the flow. So they are not strictly one-way systems.
When we're seeing these storm surges and storms, are the outfalls ultimately all underwater during those peak times?
So basically, yes, they're lower than what they would normally be for a free outfall, and so that creates a condition that slows or stops those gravity outfalls from functioning altogether.
Okay.
Question, Juno. Dealing with the gravity outfalls, there are systems out there, and I know we have some of those in the pipes leading out to it, and I know there's talks about, which you're going to get to, making check valves that it ends up stopping that influx coming back into the canals.
Yes, that's correct. So they're basically, like you said, they're backflow prevention devices. So they'll take a gravity system and turn it into a one-way flow. So it'll let it flow out, and then it'll physically stop that tide or that water from coming back into the system.
And then we live in that typical Florida low-lying area, going from Nova Road as an example to the river where the outfall goes to. If we have a king high tide, we're talking 3 feet, 4 feet difference in elevation is all we have for gravity to actually work.
Yes, that's correct, and I think it's you can really see it if you pay attention to the city, and you really notice it on the Halifax, which is the extension of the Nova Canal, around the Spruce Creek and Dunlawton area. There'll be certain times where we haven't had rain for weeks, but that canal is brimming at the top. It's like right up near the surface, and that's because of those king or those ultra high tides pushing that system all the way up into our city like that. So yeah, they are very heavily tidally influenced.
So check valves are important.
Yes.
Okay.
And currently, we don't have check valves on any of them.
So we have some backflow prevention devices on some smaller pieces of pipe along Ridgewood, but I think we only have 6 or 7 backflow prevention devices currently in the city.
Once those devices are, so what I've seen in some of the others around the state is when the outfall point of exit, we'll call it, is underwater, even if they have the backflow prevention device, the water just flows over top of it. Is that correct, or not, or could it still be benefit to have? Could we benefit from that even in the lowest lying areas, knowing that that's going to be underwater in a even a low case storm surge?
So it's a great question, and the answer is it depends, right?
Got it.
So like in a situation like, let's kind of, if you take Ridgewood south of Dunlawton Avenue, on the east side of Ridgewood, no matter, even if you put backflow prevention devices on those pipes, sometimes the tide is so high it comes up over the seawall, and Halifax goes underwater anyway.
Right.
But once you get to US 1 is higher, so the water won't physically get over US 1. So if we put backflow prevention devices on the west side of US 1, it can prevent the water at least from going into the lower lying areas on the west side of US 1.
Gotcha.
So you have to be strategic with how you do it. Just one more thing on this map, and I don't have my pointer, so I'm going to have to exit out of the Zoom here. But if you look at these two right here, you'll notice that we have a blue arrow facing a purple arrow. And so that's going to come into play later on in the presentation, where we have a major, or our biggest gravity outfall in the Nova Canal system meets at the same place our largest pump station outfall in the Cambridge Canal pump station. They meet at the same place. So, and when we start going over the projects later, we try to address that situation.
Juno, can I ask you a question?
Please.
So back to king high tides, storm surge, water's coming over Halifax, it's pushing all the way to US 1. Right? We've been very fortunate we haven't had a direct hit from the Atlantic. Most of our storms come from the southwest. We have high tides due to high winds. We have king high tides due to lunar. When it rains 22 inches, on the other side of US 1, what do we do with that water? I mean, we got a storm surge, and we got 22 inches of rain.
So that's an excellent question, and not to get you too far in advance, but that's when you have to turn what we call mechanical means, aka pumping. We have to pump that water, so you can't overcome those tides if you pump water.
Currently, we don't have those mechanisms.
We have a couple of smaller pump stations along that corridor that we do have, but as you'll see as I go through some of the projects, that's a lot of times the solution we landed on.
Thank
That's good. Yep, that was that one. So that was just kind of the brief history of, kind of big picture basins, into canals, ponds, canals, and ditches, into outfalls, and kind of how all the system ties together. Next, we're going to look at some of the causes of flooding in Port Orange, and we're going to really focus on Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Milton, because those are our two most severe flooding storms that we've had. And we're going to start off by kind of taking a step back in time and taking a look at when development and where development occurred in Port Orange, and the timing of that development associated with stormwater regulations. So if you look at the map on the map, if you look at the shaded area is the area of the city that was primarily developed prior to 1990. So we had about 12,000 homes developed prior to 1990, and that's about 54% of all the homes in Port Orange. Not all of them in that shaded area, but the vast majority of them are in that shaded area. And why is 1990 important? Well, going in through the mid 80s into the late 80s, the federal government, the state government was developing stormwater regulations and how to managed stormwater. And then in November of 1990, the city formally adopted our specific stormwater design criteria that we're still using. A lot of that criteria today, obviously, we've developed and kind of advanced that criteria. But starting in November of 1990 is when the city started, we had those specific design criteria for stormwater regulations. So over the half of the homes in the city were constructed prior to stormwater regulations. That's an important thing to note. This next slide is very colorful, first of all. And as you'll see on the, and for a point of reference, because it might be kind of hard to see, this right here is, so this line right here, this is Nova Road. This is Dunlawton Avenue right here. You have your B19 canal here, and then your Nova Canal comes down Nova, turns into the Halifax Canal once it turns east on Canal View, continues down Spruce Creek Road, and ultimately into Rose Bay. So what this slide is showing is basically it's showing the elevations of the city with your lighter yellows and greens indicating lower elevations. And if you'll notice, you know, that Nova Road corridor, primarily east of Nova Road is where the lowest elevations we have in the city. And as you start moving west towards like Clyde Morris and then beyond that, and you started to get into the orange and the reds, the elevations in the city goes up.
I'm actually shocked we have anywhere in the city that has 55 feet above sea level.
We were actually, when we saw that,
Living here 20 some years, I couldn't tell you where that is.
Hensel Road.
Yeah, you're right.
he's 100% correct.
Yeah.
And we were surprised when we saw that as well. We were like, where is that at? And that's actually indicated by this kind of, there's a ridge line that runs kind of diagonally through the city, and that's what that white indicates.
Put your skateboard and go to Hensel Road.
I went to Spruce Creek Elementary. I used to ride my bike down there, and that's the only spot I know of. Yeah.
So the other thing of note on this, kind of a little preamble is you'll notice we have an outline, you know, kind of white and black outline with numbers in them, and we're going to talk about all those areas coming up in the presentation because those are areas we focused on for flood prevention projects or flood mitigation projects. Okay, so now we're going to start talking about FEMA special flood hazard areas. And so a little bit of history. So the FEMA flood maps, or as we know them as flood insurance rate maps, they were really developed in the 60s, and they were really prompted by the National Flood Insurance Program, and they were meant to encourage homeownership and to protect properties from against flooding. So these are federal maps. These are maps that are developed by the federal government in association with the National Flood Insurance Program. And of note on this map, we have shaded in green is the flood zone AE is shaded in green, and the AE indicates that it's a flood zone with a base flood elevation established, meaning in those areas in green, these maps have identified that at this elevation, usually it's around 5 or 6 or 7, depending on what area you're in the city, that's where they anticipate the flood water to be in those shaded areas. So if you develop in those, you can develop in these special flood hazard areas with base flood elevations today, but you have to put the finished floor elevation or the floor elevation where your floor is at has to be a minimum of 1 foot above that base flood elevation. So if your base flood elevation is at 5, the minimum your floor can be is at elevation 6. And since 2014,
And that's been determined by, that's FEMA's mandate.
that's FEMA's elevation, and that's, I believe that's city code, right, Tim? That's the city code.
Okay.
The minimum right now is at 7, right?
It depends on the area.
I didn't think it was in any area. The minimum is 7.
In terms of our code, basically, the area can vary, but basically our code is to be 1 foot above whatever that establishment is for that.
Base flood elevation is FEMA, but the elevation, the extra foot, we added in our code. So that,
Right, yeah.
And we
Okay.
do have some areas with the base flood elevation of 5,
Oh, wow.
which would make your minimum floor elevation 6.
Okay.
Basically. And so since 2014, we've only had about 337 homes constructed in the zone AE, and all of those have obviously their finished floor above 1 foot above that base flood. But we still have approximately 5,000 homes that are in that zone AE that are either at or less than 1 foot above that base flood elevation. So that's still a lot of homes that are in peril. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the causes of the most recent flooding, and this graphic is one I think we probably showed before. We've shown this one before, but it really does tell a tale, right? So, Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Milton both were very similar storms, and that they were fairly slow moving storms. They were low cat ones, or even Ian was a tropical storm when it came over Port Orange. It wasn't even hurricane status when it came over. But the thing that they both had in common is when the eye exited the state, it was just south of Port Orange. And that puts us in that northeast quadrant, and as we know, we call that's the dirty side of the storm, right? So that's, in that northeast quadrant, that's known for your higher rain totals and your more severe weather. So we caught a little bit of, or a lot of bad luck, I should say, from those storms being just how they tracked across the state. They went really, really slow and dumped a lot of rain on us. This is really just kind of follows up with the previous slide, except for, so after Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Milton, myself and public works staff and management staff, we have visited dozens and dozens and dozens of residents, right? We've talked to dozens of residents on the phone, at their houses, and for some of the longer term residents, the residents that have lived here for a long time, we started to hear a common theme. I've lived here 20 years. I've lived here 30 years. I've lived here 40 years. I've never flooded. How is that possible? So, well, let's try to figure that out. Why is that possible? So we went and did a deep dive, and we did some heavy research into 100 years of rainfall event here in Florida. So we went back 100 years, and we graphed all of the largest rainfall events we had in those past 100 years. And as you can see, with the exception of 1924, which is just a little bit before my time, we had a 15-inch rain event. We don't know the results of that rain event. We just know that we got that rain event. And really, up until we got to 2010, with that, or the 2009 May 2009 event, we didn't really have anything over that 11 inches of rain. And why that line is important, that red line you see there, that red line is that's where our standard is right now. So you design a stormwater system today, your stormwater system has to hold that 11 plus inches of rain before it starts releasing water. So that's kind of the dividing line. And we have it divided into pre-1990 and post-1990, kind of going back to pre-regulations, post-regulations. And as you can see from this slide, Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Milton, the two largest rain-producing events that the city has had in the last 100 years.
Actually, before I saw this graph, so being born and raised here, I was born in 1970, not 1924, but being born and raised here, growing up, you perceive things and you think, okay, when I was a kid, I remember this storm and what have you. And I remember Hurricane David in 1979. We lived in Lantern Park in South Daytona, now closely abuts to Port Orange. And I remember rowing a blue canoe up and down the street for 3 days after that storm. And it didn't have anywhere near double-digit impacts. But before I saw this graph, trying to put a lot of this in my perspective as well, because
Sure.
I think before you know where you're going, you got to know where you've been and what these numbers really mean. And so I went back and I was impressed at the data that is actually available to go back into the 70s, 60s, and 50s on calculated rainfall, not just from named storms, but by any searchable content. I mean, it's pretty impressive. The other thing I wanted to just make note is when we're looking at these numbers, this is rainfall in 24 hours, right?
Yeah, so these are 24-hour totals that
Right.
we're showing.
So one of the things I saw was interesting in some of the data I looked at was some events, you think 8 inches in 24 hours is a lot of rain, but if that 8 inches falls in 3 hours, that can be as catastrophic as 11 or 12 inches in a lot of the scenarios from some of the data that I've been looking at and seeing. So
Absolutely.
I think when it comes to how much rainfall, it's important for us to also understand how fast that rain comes. In terms of, I know you're going to talk about projects, how much water can we move?
No, and so that's actually an excellent point, because a lot of times we do get focused on just, it's 11 inches, 11 inches, 11 inches. But as you indicated, that rainfall intensity is almost as important as the total amount of rain that you got. And in my next slide, I'm actually going to show you something that kind of proves us that. So this slide shows basically the past 10 years of storm events that we've had, or 20 years, I'm sorry, 20 years of storm events. And then the map shows damage in the city associated with Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Milton. And primarily this is flooding damage. I'll give you a quick zoom so that it's a little bit easier to see the map. And as you can see, so the big green line with arrows, that's the Nova Canal system. And as you can see, that system, and again, it's on the east side of the city, the lower lying portions of the city, the portions of the city that were developed prior to stormwater regulations is where we had our most flooding occurrences happen. And so again, focusing on Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Milton, Hurricane Ian, 20 plus inches of rain, over 1,000 structures flooded. And then for Hurricane Milton, you see that our rainfall total was just over 15 inches. And yet we had more structures flooded for Hurricane Milton. So we really started diving into the data on that. And we actually heard a lot of firsthand witness of the data that we're gonna talk about. So for Hurricane Milton, just what you said previously, between the hours of 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., we got almost 10 inches of that rain. So 10 inches of rain in 3 hours. That's unheard of. That's unpublished type rainfall intensity. So you don't see that kind of rainfall intensity. You don't model for that rain kind of intensity. You don't design for that kind of intensity. On top of all that, we had a tidal surge associated with the storm, and I went back and looked at the tide charts, and high tide at Ponce Inlet was at 2:45 a.m. So as we're getting nailed with these high intensity rain bands, we got tidal surge coming in on us, and we're sitting at high tide. So it was literally, everything wrong that could have happened at that time did. And that is why we had more flooding with less rain. So Mayor, you hit the nail on the head with sometimes you get so focused on the amount of rain, but you got to also pay attention on how much time that rain fell in.
I think one other thing in this too, though, is that the amount of rain that we actually took in the 2 weeks before the storm. We were really, really saturated before these storms came. So we were already at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
And that's something that you can't tell. You'd have to go back and check the data on that prior to this rain.
I actually did go back and check that one out because we have some really nice high-tech weather stations. We have one at the EOC, which is located at the police department. And we have one on the east side out at Public Works. So I was kind of combing through the rainfall data, and I went back. It was about 10 days prior. We had over 5 inches of rain in those 10 days prior. So we were all of the ponds were full. Everything was trying to, as we call in the industry, was trying to recover. So your pond gets filled up, and your ponds are trying to recover, your systems are trying to recover, and before they had a chance to fully recover, we got hit with Hurricane Milton.
Which is the same thing. You look at these numbers, 267 homes on Hurricane Francis 20 years ago. That was Charlie Francis Jr. We got flooding then because we were already saturated at the same time. And that was 9 inches of rain then.
And that, if I remember correctly, Hurricane Francis was one of those where it was 9 inches of rain, but that was spread out over 12 or 15 hours, right? So it wasn't that incredibly high intensity rains. That we really saw those for Hurricane Ian, but then when Hurricane Milton came, he said, pardon my friend, hold my beer, right? Let me show you what rainfall really is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of the first part where we've looked at the stormwater systems, how they function, where they go, kind of looked at some of the root causes of the flooding from Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Milton. Now we're going to start talking about some of the ongoing actions, some of the planning actions that we've been taking, and some of the maintenance and repair actions that we do as well as a city. So the first thing is Stormwater Master Plan. That's what we're here talking about tonight. As the manager indicated, we're about 95% complete with the master plan. I have a draft of the plan that I'm currently reviewing. And so really what we're doing right now is we've developed a matrix to try to prioritize these projects. So we're really finalizing that prioritization matrix to prioritize the projects. And probably the most important thing is trying to figure out how we're going to pay for all these projects, because none of these projects are cheap. unfortunately. Or not cheap, but not
Cost effective.
cost effective. Thank you, Councilman Green, I appreciate that. And then so at the same time, as we're doing the master plan, we're doing what we call a vulnerability assessment. And this is something that a couple of years ago, the state came up with this Resilient Florida program. And then, so the Resilient Florida program is a program that makes you eligible for grant money to build projects. Before you can be eligible to apply for grant money to build projects, you have to perform a vulnerability assessment on your city. We received a grant from DEP, from FDEP, to perform this assessment. We're about 75% done with that assessment. So once we complete the stormwater or the vulnerability assessment, we package that up and we send that to FDEP. They review it, and once they accept the vulnerability assessment, then we're eligible to apply for what they call implementation grants or construction money, up to 50% of the construction cost. So if we're looking at a $20 million project, we're potentially eligible for $10 million through Resilient Florida by doing this vulnerability assessment and having it accepted by the state. So it's kind of it's not lost in the shadows. We're kind of doing it behind the scenes. We're working really hard, and the state's they've actually commented a few times that they're really impressed how efficiently and how quickly we're able to get through this vulnerability
Is the
assessment.
stormwater master plan part of the vulnerability assessment?
So they're
We're talking
separate.
one and the same, or?
They're separate, but they complement each other.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's some overlap in the science, and there's a little bit of overlap in the modeling as well, but they are completely separate projects. And then the last thing, next thing I'm talking about is what we're going to call so watershed studies. So back to, I think it's the first or second slide, we showed the map of the county with all the major watersheds in it. And so we're going to working in partnership with Volusia County through the Transform 386 program. The county is going to fund additional watershed studies for us. So the first one is the Nova Canal. We all know that the Nova Canal is a regional drainage canal, right? From Ormond Beach through Daytona, Holly Hill, South Daytona, and then ultimately to us with our outfall at Rose Bay. So this is a regional canal. So this study we're going to do at the county is really going to kind of kickstart those regional solutions. So we're going to, with the portion we're going to do, we're going to focus on, kind of the Port Orange area, but we're also going to kind of go up the canal to make sure that things are going to that are happening upstream of us aren't going to have negative effects on us. And so some of the things that we'll look at in the Nova Canal study is we're going to look at the canal itself. Is there anything we can do to improve storage in the canal? Is there anything we can do to make the canal flow more efficiently? Is there pinch points in the canal that we could potentially take out? We're going to take a look at the Reed Canal outfall. Is there anything that can be done with the Reed Canal outfall? Can it be changed to get more storage out of it? Can we make that canal more efficient? Can we potentially backflow that canal so that we're not getting the huge tidal surges up the Reed Canal? Because we do get a lot of what we're getting in the Nova Canal is that tidal push back up that Reed Canal into the Nova Canal.
And when we say when we're talking about Nova Canal, we're talking about the state. We're talking about the Florida Department of Transportation. They're the ones that own the canal, right?
So the FDOT owns the portion of canal that runs along Nova Road, and once that canal turns east on Canal View, that then turns into a county canal.
Okay.
So it's kind of a joint, again, to the regionalness of that canal. It's state and then it's county. And we attended a presentation where the county public works director a couple of weeks ago made it he wanted to make sure that everybody understood that he did not maintain that canal on Nova Road or on that state road. So it really is, it's multi-jurisdictional, it's state, it's county, it's local governments, and we all really have to work together to come up with solutions that not only, we don't want a solution that just works for Port Orange or just works for South Daytona.
If it's for me, just take a message and I'll call them back.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
We're really trying to focus on solutions that are going to help up and down the canal, with obviously Port Orange for us being the most important.
So we go ahead.
No, I insist.
We talk about like Port Orange being the bottom of the funnel, so to speak, because everything's got to go out Ponce Inlet at some point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know this is probably going to sound like a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Does all of the Nova Canal, does it all flow to the south? I know there's a couple of outfalls before you get to us,
So
but
there are-
predominantly everything flows south, right?
There are a couple of outfalls to the north of us, the closest one being the Reed Canal outfall, but primarily it does flow north to south.
Okay.
with our outfall into roads being the ultimate outfall for that system.
Do you know if any of the stuff in like Holly Hill and Ormond flows north into Tomoka, or is theirs flowing south also? Do you know?
So kind of going back to those drainage basins. So the idea behind a drainage basin is if you're in the Nova Canal drainage basin, every drop of water that drops in that goes to Nova Canal, and Nova Canal does not flow up into the Tomoka River.
Okay. Thanks.
So I will just preface that with saying the B19 basin flows into Spruce Creek, so that's a basin kind of flowing into a basin.
Okay.
Why does it flow south? Just curious. I mean, if the land's flat or whatever. I mean,
Probably the pull of the inlet.
Gravity or
Is it?
So the in normal tide conditions, the tide is slightly lower, so there is some gradient or some fall with that system, but it's practically flat, but with the ultimate outfall being slightly lower, so things are going to tend to flow north to south.
So question dealing with the Nova Road Canal, as it goes south, you talked about the county and the state owning pieces of it as it goes south. Who owns the end of it? Is it still in their hands, or is it us?
So it's the county's canal until its outfall underneath Nova Road into there's like a little creek system that kind of by the go-kart track area.
Yeah.
That kind of flows south, and ultimately it flows underneath the railroad tracks.
Yep.
Into Rose Bay.
That's after it goes down Canal Street.
Yes,
After it
that's
makes
correct.
the
But the count-
hard
and-
right turn.
And the county owns it until then.
That's correct.
The question I was going to have is this is multi-jurisdictional canal. Correct me if I'm wrong. This Nova Canal's been causing problems for South Daytona and further cities too.
All the way up
and
into
like
Oregon.
it's all the way up.
Yeah.
So it benefits everyone for us to get together to find a solution that might improve that.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a regional drainage system, and in order to fix this, it's going to require regional solutions.
And that's something we are able to do from our seats because we can work with our county officials, state officials, and even other council people at other cities to help just kind of lobby there and talk to them. I've had great conversations with Councilman Sanders in South Daytona, Matt Reinhardt at the county. So,
Yeah, and
those are things that we can do from our seats to just make sure they understand how important it is to us and to everyone.
And the county's been a great partner to us, so we're really looking forward to working with the county on this and strengthening that relationship with the county because they can be a really great ally for us.
Absolutely.
I've heard a lot of comments about, I don't understand why we don't dig it deeper, and I kind of know why.
Fill it up.
You can't dig it deeper because it'll collapse in on itself.
Well,
right?
and
Groundwater's there.
And
And
once
then
you
there's
reach
water line.
groundwater, you can't.
Correct.
If your groundwater's sitting here, I mean, I'll take the bottle of water, right? So if this is your groundwater, you can take this bottle of water and you could dig it down another 100 feet.
Doesn't
But you don't get any more storage in that bottle than where that water level's at. So that's the main reason why digging it. Now, establishing the bottom where it should be is important, but just going in and digging it deeper, it's not a solution.
Gotcha. And the history of that canal, was it designed for this?
So it was not originally designed for this, and this is similar with most of the major canals. They are originally constructed as mosquito control canals, something to drain the low-lying areas to allow for development.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Same with the B19.
B19 is absolutely that.
Yeah.
And so, thank you for that segue. So the other important watershed study we're going to do with the county is the B19 canal. Now, we don't have the widespread flooding along the B19 canal like we do along the Nova Canal, but we do have pockets in Willow Run and some of the areas going north up towards Madeline. So, but the thing about the B19 that's really unique to itself is if you're familiar with, like, if you know where the LA Fitness is over there on, I call it East Taylor Road for lack of a better term. There's a little bridge that goes over the B19 canal as you head east towards Spruce Creek High School.
Mm-hmm.
So just upstream of that bridge, there's a weir, a flow control weir that's been installed.
Explain what a weir is.
So a weir, in essence, is a wall. So they've built a wall in the channel, and the water has to rise up to the level of that wall before it flows over. So that holds the water back. And so one of the things we've immediately identified that we're gonna proof this out in the study is there's something we can do with that weir is, can we put a gate on the weir to pre-stage that canal? Can we make it what can we do at that point? Because we know where our point of constriction or our point of issue is on that B19 canal. So that's going to be one of the major things we're going to look at with that B19 study. Another thing we're going to do, and this can be a fairly short-term solution, is the city has we have a lot of pipes that discharge or outfall into that B19 canal. And we're going to look at where it makes sense to put backflow prevention devices on those pipes that flow into the B19. So if the B19 stages up, as long as it doesn't spill over its banks and it stages up, we can prevent that water from flowing back into the streets.
That particular area that you're talking about, because I know we've had that conversation, what if we can find a better process there at that weir, what areas do you believe that directly benefits?
So that
Mostly the Cambridge area?
No, so the B19, that directly benefits the Willow Run area.
That far south, that weir does?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Okay, I'll follow you. Okay.
And that
Is that-
B9
how
canal
about-
is the one that runs behind Colony in the Woods.
That was going to be
That's
mine.
correct.
That's literally maybe 4 feet across.
That's correct.
Correct. For B19, where he's talking about, for you guys to understand, is where it comes through on Madeline. You got the Twin Lakes through Madeline. It's the next little bridge that you cross. So it heads north. It goes up to Pelican Bay area. It comes down between Sunset Cove and Cross Creek.
Yep.
Then it winds down through into Willow Run. And me and Geno's had lengthy conversations about this. You know, we have all these projects to try to help the mitigation of flooding in major areas, but it's also making sure that we're not doing proactiveness on stuff that's coming down the road. And those areas had heavy flooding. You know, we've had 2 major storm events. We've never had water stand in our gutters, but now we got knee-deep water in the roads in all these areas. The fortunate part is the homes didn't flood in that area, but if you don't start addressing it in time, it could happen. So what he's talking about on this weir was brought up because I came in with a video, the same video he took probably 2 hours before me, and going, it's a kayak class 2 rapids coming off the weir. So everything down south of that had no water standing or flooding off the banks south of that weir, but you had water flooding to the north. So it's how do you mitigate that weir
Choke
to
point.
make the point of
Right.
getting the headwater off of it.
Right. Excellent point. Thank you.
Where does the B19 start? I know I'm looking at the
So
map on page 8.
the B19 starts just kind of south of the airport,
Okay.
kind of where the Speedway and the airport are at.
So it's
Into
another,
the Amazon
it's
building
slightly
and then-
multi-jurisdictional as well.
Correct.
But
It's
once again, it all comes to us.
Seeing a theme.
Yeah. We are. Now I
Okay.
know why they have port in the name.
All right.
So, and this is not my area of expertise by any stretch of the imagination. This is something that primarily our community development department is working on, but it's just another thing that the city's working on. There's multiple programs that are out there to help individual homeowners. FEMA being the first one. FEMA, we have a lot of, and I think the unique thing is with FEMA, the FEMA grants, first of all, take a long time to process. We're still waiting for responses back from Hurricane Ian through the FEMA process. And then the city has to be the applicant on those grants. And then so the state did a really good thing early in 2024. They developed a program called, if I get it correctly, it's called Elevate Florida, and that's run through the Florida Department of Florida Department of Emergency Management runs that program. And the idea behind that, it's going to be basically a mirror or a very similar program to what the federal government or what FEMA's doing. But their idea is they want to take those timeframes and cut them in half or even greater than that. They want these grant processes to move very quickly. And these grants, the individual homeowners apply for these grants. Correct, Tim? Okay, thank you. And then the other thing that's available for the individual homeowners is going back to the transferring 386 through the county. There are some individual assistance available through the county. And I know the county is holding, I think they actually held a couple of workshops today for the individual assistance. So there's a lot of, so aside from the big regional stormwater projects that we're going to try to construct that's going to help a lot of people, there's a lot of one-offs that maybe it doesn't make sense to do a $5 million project for 3 homes or something like that. That's where these other programs become really important because there's still something available for those homeowners.
Just a quick comment on the FEMA stuff is that one of the things and the frustrations we have is a city that some of you that'll sit up here for a while will find out is that FEMA, which is federal government, seems to change with the presidencies. So, and natural disasters. So when you had a major incident many years ago in New Jersey, FEMA found out that a lot of people were skimming money and doing things they shouldn't have been doing with it. It created a slew of blanketed restrictions and changes, which changed how we did a lot of the stuff. But we are not bigger than FEMA. And regardless of what happens, we need to adhere to the regulations and the stipulations in order to be able to get our residents access to those dollars, however they are, wherever they are, and how we ever need to get there, because they really are that important. And I only mention that because obviously with the new president in Washington D.C. now, we've already heard that there's an interest in getting rid of FEMA. So we will continue to watch that closely and make adjustments accordingly. So.
Yes. All right, so next, just very quickly, we're just going to talk about some ongoing actions that we as a city do, and I just want to preface that by saying these are not actions we started after Hurricane Ian. All these things I'm going to talk about are things we've been doing for decades. I just think it's important to see what we're out there doing on a daily basis, right? So the first thing, we'll go back to the ditches, right? So with 14 miles of ditches, again, a third of the total ditches that we have in the city is responsible for maintaining. And so this is a year-round activity for us. So we're in these ditches, and a lot of these ditches are really hard to get to. So it's not like you can just, some of them you can drive up next to a road, you can clean the ditch and drive away. Other ones are very difficult to get to. We have limited access to get back to. And so even when we get back to them, we have to have really specialized pieces of equipment to get into these ditches. You can kind of see, so we have what we call our Kaiser here, down in a ditch, in the muck and in the ditch running. And part of these really specialized pieces of equipment, you got to have a highly skilled operator to get in there and run that piece of equipment to make sure you're not doing damage to the banks of the ditch. So you make sure you clean it appropriately and getting the material out that needs to get out. Just real quick, so we have over 5,000 drainage inlets in the city. So this is a constant thing we're doing. We're repairing. This is what we call the apron to the inlet. So these things are getting broken all the time. So we're always out there repairing these, and sometimes we're even going out and replacing inlets altogether if they've been damaged or broken for something like that. So this is an ongoing activity for us. Corrugated metal pipe. So going back to the 70s and 80s when we were developing half of the city, it was common practice in those days to use what they call corrugated metal pipe, or CMP, for the roadway drainage infrastructure, for the pipes underneath the roads that's going to capture the roadway drainage and route it to a pond or route it to a canal. And due to our high groundwater, so the groundwater in the older parts of the city is really high, maybe a foot or two below the surface sometimes, and these metal pipes sitting in that water for decades and decades and decades, they corrode and they rot away. And you see a really good example of that right there. So you see that piece of pipe, that was underneath the road. And so when those pipes fail, it causes, not only do you have to fix the pipe, you got to dig up the road, you got to fix the road, and those are very expensive fixes. So what we're trying to do to be proactive with that is we also have another method we could do. It's a trenchless method, and it's called cured in place pipe lining. So you basically have a liner that's impregnated with a resin, an epoxy type resin, and so they run that liner all the way through this piece of pipe that needs to be fixed or rehabbed, and you seal off one end and you inject either hot steam or hot water into that liner, and it blows that liner up to adhere to match the diameter of the pipe, and then from the heat it sets that resin off. And so as that resin sets off and cures, you end up with a brand new piece of pipe inside your old piece of pipe. So much less, you're not digging up roads most of the time, you're not having to do major repairs. So we're being very proactive with trying to get out into the older areas and find these pipes before they fail and line them. And just as a point of reference, we have about 12 miles of the CMP remaining in the city. And if we fund it at $1 million a year, it's still going to take us almost 15 years to get all that pipe either replaced or lined. So we will be doing this for quite some time.
Okay.
The next thing is street sweeping. I like to call this our first line of defense. First line of defense for our drainage system. So we're sweeping the roads, just basically trying to get as much debris, leaves, branches, oils, and grime off the road before they get down into our drainage system. For the stuff that we can't get with our street sweepers, then we have to physically get into those drainage systems and clean them. And this might be my favorite piece of equipment that we own. So I'll spend a little bit of time talking about it. So this is what we call our vac truck or our VacCon. And if you can see that you have a big hose that comes down, it's basically a really, really, really big vacuum cleaner that's got a lot of suction power. And also it's a little bit harder to see, but there's an orange hose that comes on a reel on the front of that piece of pipe. So what you do is you get that hose, which is a jet hose, and there's a jet nozzle that goes on the front of that hose, and it's got backwards facing jets, kind of like a jet engine, face backward to push you forward. So you put that jet nozzle in your piece of pipe, you turn the jet on a little bit, and it pulls itself through the pipe. And those hose reels are usually 300 to 500 feet long, so you get a couple of 100 feet out of there, and then you really crank the pressure up. You get it up to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 psi in some of these jet hoses. And you turn your vacuum cleaner on, and then the hose reel slowly reels itself back in, meanwhile pushing all that dirt, grime, and debris back to that vacuum, and we're sucking it up into that vacuum truck. The next one is just simply clearing curb lines and manually clearing a lot of work. And I'm just going to take a quick second here in the presentation to recognize our public works staff that are out there doing this work. So these are true first responders, in my opinion. So during the hurricane, I worked the EOC. A lot of times we'll get a call from police and fire saying we got a call on this road, but there's a tree down. So what do? We call public works. Hey Tom, can you get your staff out there? Fire needs to get to this house, or police need to respond to this emergency. So they're clearing trees. There's a tree falling on a house. We can't get into the house to try to rescue this person. So these guys are there cutting the limbs, they're cutting the tree down. So I just wanted to just take a quick minute to point out that these guys were out here working during the storm, in peril, and then once the storm has passed and the floodwaters recede, they're still not done. A lot of our other first responders, our police officers and our firefighters, they go back to somewhat normal operations. That's when these guys turn into, now they're driving trucks, pulling debris off and collecting the debris from the roads. So after Hurricane Milton, they worked the entire storm, through the storm, and then immediately following the storm, they're working 12-hour days, 7 days a week, collecting debris for almost 3 months. So just a quick shout out to those guys. If you see them out there, just tell them thank you and that you appreciate them. This happens to be Andrew right here. He's a really good guy.
Can we pause you for just 1 second?
Please do.
All right. So before Junos goes into the stormwater master plan, anybody have any specific questions about the information he's already kind of covered? This has been more historic and how we're designed as a city and laid out.
I do.
Lance? Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So a couple things. So how many of these vacuum trucks does the city own?
So our public works, we own what? 2
One?
of those, Brett?
Two. So I took Port Orange University,
Mhm.
and I learned that those trucks cost $800,000.
Approximately,
Roughly speaking.
I would say in today's market, you're going to be $600,000-800,000 for one of those trucks.
And it takes special people to run those trucks.
It does.
And to man these trucks and to keep these trucks on is quite expensive and quite an endeavor. Moving forward, do you think the city needs an additional vacuum truck or trucks?
So I would leave that up to the folks that are running that department. It seems like we're probably okay with that piece of equipment, but I would defer that. I would defer that to the public works staff
Okay.
at this point.
So the vulnerability study that you're mentioning, that is different from this stormwater plan that we're doing?
Yes, sir. So we're doing both of them at the same time. And
Okay, but one of them is 90% done, but these others only 70%?
the vulnerability assessment, and the vulnerability assessment, because it's a state program that they put together, and they give you a grant to do the vulnerability assessment, and they have very specific deliverables and very specific tasks that they want to see you do, and you have to do them in a sequential order. And as you complete a task, you submit a task, and they accept the task. So we're through task 9 of 13 on that.
So
And
when would you foresee us being done with that?
so we should be done with that here in the next couple of months.
So is the timing of both of them kind of coming at the same time? Or?
Yes, they are. We'll be done with the master plan a little bit before the vulnerability assessment, and then we have to, like I said, we have to submit that assessment to DEP, and then they'll do a full thorough review of the whole thing altogether, and then once they accept that, then we can start applying for the Resilient Florida grants.
Okay, and then I guess I got one more comment I'm gonna make, and I'm gonna leave this to you, the engineers, but for years and years and years, we've relied on gravity to take stormwater away. And I think we're at a point now where we need to force this. And the only way to do that is gonna be with force main pumps.
Yes, I think you'll find that once we start going through the projects, I'll explain how we always initially, when we try to develop these flood mitigation projects, we always try to go with the gravity solution first, because the gravity solution is the most economical way to do it. But when you don't get the benefit you need from those gravity solutions, then you have to turn to mechanical means, which is most of the time pumping.
And you're saying currently we only have a couple of force pumps now?
So we have our Cambridge Canal pump station, which is our largest pump station. We have
And that pump goes to where though? It's only pumping over the levee?
it pumps directly into Rose Bay, right? So kind of
But on the wrong side of the railroad track?
right, correct.
Okay. All right, so when we move forward, we're gonna talk about that project?
Yes, I'll get into when I start getting into the projects. I'm gonna give you an update on that project, that the Cambridge project that isn't necessarily part of the master plan, but that we're working on. So I'll give you an update on that here in just a
Okay.
minute.
All right, thank you.
Great point, and I'm just going to tag onto that for a second and maybe ask Wayne to weigh in. So when we using this phrase vulnerability assessment, most people don't know what it is and what the history of that is. So there was a time where if you had a project in your city and you needed state appropriations and funding, you take the project, you go to Tallahassee, you pitch your project, and you hope to get funding out of that legislative session. Well, Wayne can weigh in, but that has changed now, and for the most part, what they want to do is the legislature, being signed by the governor, they want to take a certain amount of funding and put it in a special category. And then they want you to go and apply through that process as opposed to going up there and meeting with your legislative representatives and pitching your project and all of that kind of stuff. So that has changed. That vulnerability assessment is a condition in order now to go to Resilient Florida for the funding.
Right.
So you can't, where they put the money now,
Yeah.
you can't even go try to get it until you do this part that the state is requiring. Did I get that pretty close?
That's
Go ahead,
correct.
Dan.
They wanted to make sure that we were on equal footing, so everybody had to go into a competitive grant process that used the same rules. So you weren't in a position where if your senator was more influential than someone else's, you might not get money based on need. And so they put the vast majority of that in there, and a minimum requirement to be eligible is having a vulnerability assessment. So that's how they were trying to move a lot of the programs, whether it's parks programs or anything at the state level, is away from member-based appropriations and into competitive grants where all the communities can equally compete.
And if there's any good news to that process, is it seems like we are farther along than a lot of cities in the state of Florida that may be another year or two out before they can even try to get money out of that.
So the vulnerability study realistically has nothing to do with our master stormwater plan. Our master stormwater plan is for our use, I guess, and to know what projects we need to do to help save homes. But the vulnerability study is how you go get the funding.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very good summation of it.
Okay.
It always comes back to the word funding.
Yeah.
And, you know, and we're gonna be having a funding meeting here in the next couple months, am I correct?
Right.
For our budget, and we'll be talking about this again.
And as I think you'll see, funding is going to be critical because a lot of these projects are quite expensive.
Yeah, and the way I understand it is we're good at getting grant money and we're good at having our own money, but not all of it. And when we were in Tallahassee and talking to them, we were sharing with them not only how far along we are with the studies, but the fact that we're not we're asking for a little less than 50% because of the work that you all have done already, setting money aside. So
Yeah, the local match is always very important. The local match is important, and having projects that are ready to construct are important.
and everything you've talked about outside of just maintaining on a daily basis the amount of miles that we have and so forth, nothing happens overnight. You know, when we go and apply for this stuff, you know, I don't understand why we have to wait. Well, it's because it takes a long time to get anyone from up there or from the state or from the national, like FEMA, you know, it takes a long time.
And many of these grants have what they call grant cycles, where they open up a cycle, and it's like typically a 3 or 4 month grant cycle. And if you don't get your application in, then you got to wait to the next year in the grant cycle. And that's kind of where we're at with the vulnerability assessment. We're going to miss this year's grant cycle because we're not going to be quite done. So we're going to be able to get in next year's grant cycle. And we don't have any control over that.
Yeah. Just a couple of terminologies I want you to clarify. One, and just for council and for everybody following along with what this is all about, when we use the word flooding, we're talking about our interest and priority of keeping water out of homes and businesses. Streets flooding, that's something we can work on later and get to. But can you explain what a closed loop system is and how some of the neighborhoods built prior to the 90s, I know it sounds odd, but the roads are designed to be the retention area. Can you talk about that briefly?
So the way that it was, so we didn't have specific design criteria for stormwater. So the engineers were designing to the code of the day, and they knew that they had to at least channelize and take that stormwater somewhere. So they used the roads to temporarily store and channelize that water. So the roads were the stormwater system de facto in a lot of these older neighborhoods. And really it was just a means to get it to an existing canal or trying to get it to a pond or something like that. But so yes, you're correct that the roads were in essence designed as the stormwater system.
And lastly, and then I'll move on to these folks here. I want you to touch on this because I hear this a lot from residents who are asking me questions and they've heard a term and they've kind of misunderstood what that is. The difference between pump station, lift station, and a force main pump, because not everything is pumping stormwater, it's pumping other things. So just touch on that so we make sure we're clear.
So a lot of the terminologies do cross over. So typically you have your lift, what we call our lifts, and I'll go so far as say sanitary lift stations. So we have a lot of sanitary lift stations that take the sanitary sewer from your house, from your showers, your washers, your dryers, your toilets, that go into a gravity system that flow into a wet well is what we call it, or a big well. And these lift stations take that sewage and pump it to our wastewater plant for treatment. So and they flow through what we call a sanitary force main. And all that is it's a main that you're forcing water through. And so
but not stormwater.
Not stormwater.
Right.
But we still use that same term in stormwater because it's in essence mechanically it's the same thing. The pump really doesn't care if it's pumping sanitary sewer or if it's pumping stormwater. The main difference is these stormwater pumping stations, we'll try to use pumping station for the stormwater and lift station for the sewer, just as a kind of to designate the two. These are much bigger, much bigger. So just for a point of reference, a typical sanitary lift station, your pumps are going to pump a couple 100 gallons a minute. Our smallest stormwater pumping station is thousands of gallons a minute. Our largest, down at Cambridge, one pump down at Cambridge can pump 48,000 gallons a minute. So we're moving a lot more water when you're pumping stormwater than when you are with sanitary sewer. So the pumps are bigger, the pipes are bigger, the stations are bigger, so because you're moving a lot more water.
I think one of the other things that you see a lot where the confusion comes is there's about 120 sewer lift stations in the city, 4 regional and about 115 smaller ones. There's a ton of them, and that's what people see more frequently. There's only 5 or so actual stormwater pumps that we have. So most of the time when you see one of those pumps, it's part of the sewer system.
Correct.
Tracy, anything else before we move on?
The only thing, we're just because we talked about the weir real quickly, is maybe a presentation with a pump station with float valve switches to dam over the weir, just as an ideal.
That's actually a really good idea, and I hadn't thought about that yet. So we're going to put that on the list of things to look at in the study.
Okay.
Reed?
Very good. Just want to touch on the corrugated metal pipe because I know that we've actually gone to Tallahassee and brought back some extra funds for that. We've used, I mean, we've gotten what I think 2 or 3 times what we usually did up until the last 3 years. We were able to speed that up. In talking about that, we're saying a million a year, it'd take 15 years, so it's still $15 million. I guess my question is just when it comes to that pipe, is there any chance? How much of that pipe do we know is collapsed? Not that has to be replaced, but do we know that is absolutely collapsed? And
So typically you don't know it's collapsed until the road above it fails.
okay,
So there's a lot of that pipe that's probably has some failure points to it, but a lot of times what we find and talking to our stormwater staff is they'll go and they'll dig up a piece of pipe and the top of the pipe is completely corroded away, but somehow the earth above it has stayed in the shape of the pipe. So the pipe's gone, but the earth is still there. And then a lot of times what happens is if you get a big rain event where you get a big flush in there and that pipe gets at capacity, it pushes up on that dirt and then brings that dirt down, and then that's where you start to have the failures.
gotcha. Okay.
We saw that really, a really good example of that is Madeline Avenue after Hurricane Ian. We had a big hole open up, and that was, we had basically a failed corrugated metal pipe that when that pipe got to capacity, the whole top of it fell in.
Yeah, it's the good earth that we have on the US 1 area. It comes coquina rock.
It's got some coquina mixed in there, so it does give it a little bit of structural stability.
Yep.
Huh. Very
Good?
interesting.
Yes.
Keep
And
right
then
on
just,
going then.
and just one
Oh,
more
sorry, go
thing
ahead.
real quick. I already asked the city manager to put this presentation. This is more for the audience. This presentation with all these slides, I've asked him to make a Facebook post and put that on there tonight when this is over, because I see a lot of y'all taking photos with your phones and everything else. I want you to be able to listen, take notes, and really soak it all in. So tonight, whenever this is over, we will get that whole presentation on to Facebook so you guys can be able to access it easy that way. Because I want you guys to be able to really listen to everything being said and not be worried about taking pictures of the slides.
Due to the size, because it's a massive file, we may have to look at potentially a website link or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. Whatever we can do. Obviously, someone asked me if we're going to print it off and give copies. It's 56 pages, so don't think that's going to work.
No.
But we can get it online for everyone. So.
Just as we transition now from talking about the past and the history into the future, I do think it's important. I know you can sense it, and we've been talking to people since the 2 hurricanes, this frustration about what Port Orange has done in the past, and I fully understand it. But as we're moving forward, I think it's important to note Juno got in this role he's 2-year anniversary right now as the city engineer in this role. The leadership of the Public Works Department, 2 years in that role. In the 2 years, this is following Ian, he came into my office. I'd started a little before Ian. He came into my office one day after the storm and within an hour and a half explained to me our stormwater system in a very short period of time. We have a master plan almost done, a vulnerability assessment with grant eligibility almost done. The Cambridge project is well underway in design, and the Madeline Pepper Hill is already under design. They've done this in a matter of about 2 years, and I know everybody wish we'd done that 15, 20, 30 years ago, and you can be mad about the past, but we have to move forward and start making improvements, and mad about the past doesn't fix the future. So I just want to make sure that as people listen to him talk, he's not why we're in this spot. He's here solving the problem and moving us forward. So whatever frustration, don't take it out on him. He has moved us tremendously forward, as has the public works staff that we put here 2 years ago. So I get the frustration. Just it's not them. They're here to make a difference.
Go ahead.
But we will listen. So before I get into the master plan, I just want to recognize once again Kimley Horn and Associates. They're the engineering consulting firm that we hired to perform this master plan. We hired them because they're more than qualified to do this. They have industry experts. They've performed these large stormwater master plans and watershed studies throughout Florida and really throughout the Southeast. And they just have vast resources available to them. And resources to an engineering company is their people. They have really, really good people and really, really smart people working for us. So we do have a couple of them here tonight in our audience, and I appreciate you guys all showing up. And they worked really, really hard for us on this. And granted, we paid them for it, but they still worked really hard for us.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we set off this project, we really had 3 main objectives to our stormwater master plan. The first objective is let's analyze and figure out where the city flood's existing. Granted, we kind of already knew that, but we're gonna analyze it. We're gonna make sure that we have a full understanding of where the city floods. We wanted to evaluate our existing infrastructure and the need for repair and replace. Corrugated metal pipe being that primary focus of the repair and replacement. So I have a full R&R manual that they produce as part of this master plan as well, that's going to help us moving forward in those 15 years, so we can systematically start getting to some of this repair and replacement. And to me, the most important thing that we set out to do is to develop solutions for flooding, right? So that's really what we're here to talk about, and that was really the primary focus of the master plan, was to come up with solutions to the flooding. And so the master plan is a document that's got a lot of information, but the heartbeat, the heart and soul of that master plan is what we call a stormwater model. And a stormwater model is basically, it's a computer simulation. And so you use this model to try to predict something's going to happen. I'll kind of make a quick analogy to weather. You know, you have your Doppler radars, right? And and then when they show you future Doppler radar, that's a computer simulation that's predicting what the precipitation is going to be based on a bunch of input parameters. So when we started building this model, to me there's two really, really important things when you're building a model. And your data collection and your data input are probably the most important thing you're going to do. So if you don't have good data to put into your model's not going to give you good input or output back out. Another really, really important thing is what we call our boundary conditions, or our tailwater conditions. And that's what's happening, so that when we do these models, you know, you kind of have to have an area, and you allow water into your model, and you allow water out of your model. And where the water leaves your model, we call that a tailwater. And so when we're running these model simulations, we were very, very conservative with our tailwaters. So meanings, we're modeling with tidal surge. We're modeling with king tides. We're not modeling at low tides when everything works beautifully. We're modeling at king tides or at tidal surge to make sure that the solutions we come up with are going to work during those conditions, because that's when we need them to work the most. And so you go through and collect your data. We collect infrastructure data, elevation data, back to the colorful slide that showed all the different colors of elevation. That got put into the model. Land use and soils are important. So how is the land being used? Is it a vacant piece of property? Is it a residential subdivision with quarter-acre lots? Is it a big box commercial with almost all impervious? You put that information into the model. Soils is important to the model. Do you have well-drained soil where you put water on the ground, it drains right into the ground? Or do you have soils where groundwater is high and the water doesn't drain very well? So that's important input into the model. And countless field visits. So because we're gathering infrastructure data based on as-built drawings, based on permit drawings, and some of these drawings are from the 60s and 70s, so we have to go out and verify a lot of this data. So there's a lot of field verification that went on with this. We also looked at FEMA damage reports and some city damage reports to try to hone the areas that were flooding in the city. And so once you put all this input into your model, then you can start running simulations. And you try to, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but you call it flooding the city, right? You do a flood simulation. So you dump a bunch of water into your model and see where the city floods at. And then that's when Kimley Horn, after they did that, then they would, because this truly was a team effort. It wasn't them doing this in a vacuum. They were doing a bunch of work, and they would come to the city, or we'd have a teams meeting, and it would be engineering staff, it'd be public works stormwater staff, it'd be our flood management staff. We'd all be kind of verifying the data. We'd say, yeah, your model looks really good there, but we don't see it happening there with the way your model's showing it. So they go back and they refine the input data, they refine some of the modeling parameters, until we could get to a point where they come to us and we go, you know what, that's exactly what we see. And that's what we call a calibrated existing conditions model. So our model is predicting accurately what actually happens in the city when we put a certain amount of rainfall into that model. So that's a really, really big milestone. Once you get to that point, then you can really start to use your model as a tool. Because up until that point, you're building it, because it's not a tool for you yet. It's not a tool for you until you've calibrated it.
So what you're saying is having Milton, unfortunately, that came through was a calibration to what they had already put together as a model to back up what they're saying.
That's an excellent point. So I think it was a day or two after Milton, I get a call from Victor, hey man, we're on the ground, man. We're just in town looking around. So they're here with their rubber boots on. They're looking to try to make sure that what their model's doing is accurately predicting what happens. So we had a real world calibration event, basically, that you don't often get when you're developing these models. So we had something that happened as we're calibrating it that we can calibrate the model to. So that really helped us have a lot of confidence in the model. It's incredibly unfortunate that it happened because we had to have so many homes that flooded.
Yeah.
But we did use that as to try to make our tool even better.
Okay.
And so once you've got your calibrated model, that's where you start going, okay, we know we've identified these areas. We call them areas of interest, the areas that we see in the model and that we know on the ground that actually flood. And then you start building scenarios that are going to try to fix the flooding. So you can say, okay, let's put in a stormwater pond here. Let's make the pipes bigger to the outfall. Let's do any number of things and then run a simulation and see how the model responds. And for a lot of what we found is our gravity solutions or our simple solutions, the model didn't have what we call any sensitivity to it. So you didn't really get any benefit. So you'd run the model before you did any improvement. You'd put the improvement into the model. We didn't see much improvement. So that's why a lot of times we ended up with a pumping solution, because then you can tell your model, okay, you've got so many what we call cubic feet per second or so much rainfall coming into this system or this pond. We're going to pump that same amount of rainfall out or that same amount of water out. So you can kind of, and then you start to really get some good benefit from the projects. And so, okay, so this slide is I want to highlight something here. See if I can figure out how to do it, because this is important. It did show up. Perfect. Data-driven solutions. That's really important. So the solutions that we come up they're data-driven. We don't think these solutions are going to work. We have data that shows that these solutions are going to work. So kind of my catchphrase that I've come up with over the past couple of days is data-driven decisions lead to effective solutions, right? So you use good data to drive your decision, your solutions are going to work. Okay, so that's just a brief kind of what is a stormwater master plan, what is a stormwater model, and now I think I'm going to get to the part of the presentation what we're all here for, right? This is where we have the pyro pop up, and this is what we're all here to talk about right now. And as you asked, I'm going to go through each project. It's going to be fairly briefly at a fairly high level, because these are. The thing about these projects that we're going to talk about, these projects are not designed. They're not on the ground yet. So we're still sitting at about 10,000 feet in the air with a lot of these projects. So we're still kind of looking at a zoomed out picture. And then once we take these projects to design, that's when we get on the ground. We do physical surveys. We know exact pipe sizes. We have a lot more real information. So we have a lot, and we have a lot better information. But I'm going to give you a real kind of like I said, about a 10,000 foot view of these projects. And I'm happy to answer questions on any of them.
Can I just stop you 1 second? As much as this is for us, it's for everyone in the crowd. Do y'all need a little break before we get into this? Because this is what we're here for. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure. Sensitive to you. I'm good to go. It's yours. I tried.
And I just want to reiterate the fact that what the mayor and the manager both said, that in the coming months, even though we're going to talk about these briefly, we're going to be able to get into a lot more detail with those individual meetings, because we'll have a lot more time to talk individual projects, individual streets. So the first one, and try not to get caught up in the names. We're engineers, we're not project namers, so we just named them what we thought makes the most sense, right? So the first one we're calling our Sugar Forest drainage improvements. So this is it's really a multi-phase project, and for phase one of the project, as we indicated, phase one of the projects. You guys have already approved the design contract, and we are going to be starting survey and kickoff meetings here in the next week or two. So this project is starting right now for design. And we estimate our design and permitting timeframe to be around a little over a year, about 14 months. We're going to try to fast track these as much as we can, but some things we don't have control over. Estimate our construction time to be about 18 months, and we see in this project for both phases, we see a lot of potential benefit. We're talking about 400 homes potentially helping with this project, both phases. Okay, so what does this project look like? So I'll just real quick, I'm gonna zoom in on this just so that we can kind of see. So there's some colors on here. You'll see the light blues and the dark blues. The light blues are areas that flooded in before the improvement. Dark blues are area that the model shows was the improvement. So again, these are very conservative estimates, and we don't have finished floor elevations for all the residents. So just because a house is shaded in light blue doesn't mean that house floods. So the model is not that sensitive to the finished floor elevations. The model is only as sensitive as the data we put into it, and we just put in ground LiDAR data. So the ground around a resident may flood. So I don't want people to think just because there's a light blue shade around where their house is, that means they're still going to flood, because that's not necessarily the case. And then I'm going to go to the next slide because it's a little bit easier to see because there's not all the stuff on it.
So while you're doing that real quick, so in this map, we have inputted the topography of all of the land?
Yes, so we were able to get the LiDAR data, and we use that LiDAR data as our topographic part. So there is topo in the model. That's correct.
Nice, thank you.
It's not survey topo, but the LiDAR data is actually incredibly accurate. They've developed this technology. It's not radar anymore. They're using light to determine the topo, and it's actually pretty accurate.
Nice, okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
Juno, so on the first page, it talks about number of homes helped, number of properties helped is 400.
Right.
But then on the slide, it says buildings removed from floodplain 183. Can you just touch on why those numbers are different? And because obviously 400 homes means 400 homes stand to benefit in some way, shape, or form. But can you explain when it says 183 removed from the floodplain?
So that's a phase 1 number, and the overall is the 400.
Okay.
So we're looking at this as a phase project,
Okay.
potentially a 2-phase project. So the phase 1 project is so the city about a year and a half ago purchased the 2.5 acre piece of property at the corner of Madeline Avenue and Pepper Hill. With the thoughts of we're going to put in a stormwater pond to help the stormwater in that area. So as we're running through our model simulations, that's the first simulation we ran, is just a pond. It didn't work. Just that pond did not solve the flooding in that area. I don't think that was a big surprise to us, but the model proved to us that didn't work. So we're not going to just dig a pond just to dig a pond. We want to make sure that these solutions are effective.
Well, I will just tell you from a non-engineer's perspective, I did think it would be significant of help. You know, I mean, you think when you take a piece of property that big and you're saying, okay, we're going to acquire this property, we're going to create this really large retention pond. I was thinking when we approved the purchase of that property that this will be significant help.
Right.
And the modeling shows it will help, but you got to have more to it. So the benefit of the modeling already has paid dividends there because that project concept has already changed so that we can move that forward. And as you're talking about these projects, are all of these modeled to how many inches in 24 hours? Or are we?
So we're modeling these to our, I hate to use this term, the 100-year storm event.
Okay.
Which is basically the 11 inches of rain over the 24-hour period. So it's
Okay.
a standard, what we call a standard design storm that is the standard for which modern stormwater systems are designed to.
Okay.
So we're designing to the existing standard. We're not designing to a Hurricane Ian or Hurricane Milton. That's not saying that these projects won't help during those events.
Sure.
But it's not realistic to model to those, to design to those type events.
Okay. All right, good.
So again, we have that piece of property. We're still going to put a pond there. We're still going to dig that same pond we're talking about. But what we're also going to do is we're going to put a stormwater pumping station there at that pond. And then we're going to pump that water all the way east to the Halifax River. So that's about roughly 8,000 feet. We're going to pump that water, and that's a closed system. So that force main, the route of that force main is not going to have any effect of anybody along the route. I know that might be a concern. Well, you're pumping it east, you're going to flood me to the east. No, the point of that force main is a closed system, so you don't allow any water
not a
out
ditch,
of that.
right.
Correct. It's not a ditch. It's not a gravity system. It's a pump system. So that's basically the project. You dig the pond, you construct the pump station, and you take your force main 8,000 feet. So the second phase of that project is the city has a pond at the end of Sugar Grove Court, It's an existing pond. There's a cul-de-sac there. Second phase is going to be to put a pump station at that pond. And then take that and tie that force main into the force main that we've already constructed.
You know the cost breakdowns for phase 1 versus phase 2? I know we got a total, but,
So we're estimating phase 2 to be between $8 and $10 million.
okay.
What's the estimate for one then?
Yeah, phase 1, 8 to 10.
Same.
Oh, okay.
And again, these are not construction cost estimates. These are kind of we call them order of magnitude estimates. So we don't have any design, so we don't know the exact size of the pumps. We don't know the exact size of the force mains. We don't know the exact size of the wet wells, and all that comes into play when you're costing these things out. And also the force main is going to kind of be the X factor in this one. The water the pipe that we're pumping through. If the force main gets to a certain size, a certain diameter, we're going to have to open cut and trench the whole way, which is going to cost a lot more money because then you have to go restore all the roadway. If we get it down to a size that we can directional drill, which is trenchless, then you can start having some significant cost savings. So, but we're not quite there yet. We're going to be there in a couple of months though, because we're going to start designing, and these people over here are they're going to help us determine that. So, but we're going to put in a force main that's appropriately sized to handle the flow that we need it to. We just don't know exactly what that size is yet. So that's kind of one of the X factors or one of the unknowns in this project.
One of the things and we can get into when you were talking about what we were designing it to, so the west side of town, when we were showing the 1990 post, all the stuff out there, so everything in Water's Edge and Woodhaven and all that area on the west side was built to that 11 inches of rain. In both storms, we had very minimal flooding out there. The issue is they're built with a ton of ponds. And so one of the exercises we did was we took Water's Edge and picked up Water's Edge with all of its ponds and dropped it over this part of the city just to estimate if this area was built with the same retention system that was built in Water's Edge, what would it look like? And over 400 homes would be in a pond. So the idea of digging holes in the ground in ponds was not going to work because you're not going to remove 400 homes. So that's where you see the pump solution come in, is right now all that water gravities to the west into the Nova Canal. When Nova's full of water, it doesn't have anywhere to go. So it just backs up in these low-lying areas and floods them. So what they were doing here is flipping it around, not relying on gravity, using a pump, forcing it the other way, and then you can use less holding area to get rid of the water because you're pushing it out instead of trying to hold it. So instead of trying to retain 11 inches of rain in a bunch of holes in the ground, you're trying to get it out into the river that can handle it all and push it out into the ocean through Ponce Inlet. So that exercise was really important because once we dropped Water's Edge over it and saw that impact, you can't go back and retrofit the old parts of town with that amount of ponds without, you just simply couldn't wipe that many homes out. So the solutions, as you'll see, tend to be pump driven because of that, because of the large amount of land it takes to retrofit if you're going to try to do it through a bunch of ponds.
That's an excellent point, and especially just to kind of go on what the manager said is, if you're going to developing today, a typical developer, depending on groundwater conditions, you're going to have to dedicate anywhere between 25 to 30% of your land for stormwater management. So I think that's when you equate to take 25 to 30% of this area, turn it into ponds. That's when you start getting into the 400 to 500 homes. So that's kind of that was one of the challenges that we had to overcome, is we did not have a bunch of vacant land in this part of town to develop a bunch of ponds.
And I think the point the mayor made earlier, that while that area is designed to 11 inches of rain, we had 15 inches in one storm and 20 plus in the other, and there were minimal homes that got water in them. Now, streets flooded, the neighborhoods, we got some of you guys that live out in that area, there was water close to your houses, but it kept it out of the houses, which was the top priority, is to make sure the water will recede out of your street, but you don't want it inside your home. And so that's just the system designed for that has worked reasonably well in those two very strong storms.
I want to touch on that real quick with you, Joe. So,
Sure.
So this particular area, this project, currently has no real outfall to the river. Now,
So that's actually an excellent point, and I'm glad you brought that up. So this area is there's kind of a little basin divide where part of this area naturally wants to drain west into the Nova Canal, And then part of this area actually does drain to the east through a series of ditches and actually flows through an area that we're going to talk about a little bit, kind of flows through the Portona area. So one of the things that we didn't take account for, we didn't take credit for, is by taking this water and capturing it, pumping it, we're not sending that water downstream, right? So we're only accounting for the benefit to this area. We didn't account for any downstream of benefits because we're not sending all that water we're going to pump. We're not sending downstream.
Okay, well,
That's an excellent
that
point.
was gonna lead me to my question on this particular project, and this project's got 8,000 feet of pipe, and it's going to the river.
Yes.
So we are gonna force this water from Spring Forest or whatever it is, all the way to the river. Are we able to capture any of the water as it goes down Charles Street, or is that not something you can do with a forced system?
Right, you can only pump into a force main. So as
Okay.
soon as you open that system up, there's going to be pressure on that pipe, right? So
You
if
lose
there's, as soon as you open it up, you lose the pressure and it's going to flow out.
Okay, but like you just said at the same time though, now that we're not pushing gravity water towards Charles Street, it should relieve that area as well.
Correct, and we did not account for those benefits. So that's why everything we did was ultra conservative. We did not want to oversell any of these projects, so we didn't take into account any kind of downstream or any kind of outside the basin effects, and we are going to see some of that.
Okay.
And I think
Does the model show that at all? When you, like, I know you're not accounting it.
It's really difficult when you start trying to do, because some of these simulations can take a day to run. I mean, these are really, really, really complex and a lot of calculations. So if you start trying, you could end up crashing your system if you try to do too much with the model.
Got it.
But for those of us that have been on the ground in these areas during some of these events, I think one of the things, at least I feel like I've seen that I'm very confident of, is that the area doesn't have a lot of retention because of the design from many, many decades ago. But when that Nova Canal starts to overflow,
You're done.
it just continues to flow east.
It
And
does.
so you can't help but think that this type of a project mitigates a lot of stuff outside of this scope of the area, because we've seen it. We just know that the water is just going to continue to flow all the way down Charles, through Sugar Forest, down,
To the river.
yeah, all
Underneath the
way.
railroad tracks
So-
and out to Riverwalk Park is where it eventually ends up from here.
Right. Now, just for point of clarification, because I know I'm hoping some folks are going to take the opportunity to email Senator Wright and Representative Chase Tremont. The name of this project is different.
It is different, and that's why I kind of mentioned that, and I apologize for it. And
And that's okay. So I just want to make sure folks understand. So this particular project that we're talking about tonight, the Sugar Forest drainage area, just geographically speaking, a lot of people know where Sugar Forest is. This is not just for Sugar Forest only, but in Tallahassee, this project for appropriations, we've got it titled, I think, as
Madeline and Pepper Hill.
Madeline and Pepper Hill, because that's where the
That's where the
piece
pond
of
is at.
property was purchased.
Correct.
That will be the center point of the project. So if you are writing, if you could take note of that we're asking them to support the Madeline and Pepper Hill project, just so we're not having any confusion there. Go ahead, Eunice. What else you got on that one?
So that's all on that project, and I'll move on to the next if there's no other questions.
So hold on, Juno.
Certainly.
So real quickly on that. So I know you guys are saying that building the ponds and things of that nature, it doesn't solve the picture of what was showed, and I get that. But you're still going to utilize the pond for the project.
That's correct. So that's what we're pumping from. So you have to feed that pump, and that pond is going to feed that pump.
Okay, not to be the guy on the standing post jumping off here. My question to you is you're going to need the pond no matter what. We're within how many more months before hurricane season? Isn't anything better than nothing?
That's an excellent point.
Just asking the question,
and
because
it-
we're going to appropriate the money to this project to go. They're going to need the pond no matter what.
And it's a little bit more complex than just the pond. You have to get the water to the pond.
Yep.
So we have to do some collection system improvements in the surrounding area to pipe to the pond. So just digging the pond isn't going to give you, it's almost next to no benefit, because you still have to get the water from the outreaches of that area into the pond, and that's much bigger, because then you're putting in drain pipes and roads and things like that.
Okay.
So
Oh, just-
it's an excellent question though.
And funding wise, correct me if I'm wrong, but once we spend that money, they're not going to reimburse us on it versus getting the grant. So it's going to allows our dollars to go further if it's not providing an immediate benefit, then it allows our taxpayer dollars to go further to get more matching funds when we hopefully get the grants from the state.
Hopefully. And that's,
Is there any money available from selling the dirt of that pond?
Potentially, and that's something whenever we bid the project out, we'll bid that out as a,
Absolutely,
if we
there
keep
is.
the dirt, you'll charge us this much. If you give us the, so we'll have them price it both ways. If they get to keep the dirt, it'll cost less to dig the pond, whereas if we take the dirt, it'll cost us a little bit more.
Good dirt's like gold right now.
It is, absolutely.
The other element that I think is important for all of us to make sure you keep in mind is that on all of these projects, part of this painful process that we have to go through is we could all agree in this room tonight to go out there and do X, Y, and Z if we had all the money right now. We can't do it. You still got to go through the permitting process, and there are a lot of other agencies way above us that got to review these projects and sign off on them and ensure that these projects are executed without impacting negative other areas, South Daytona, other areas of the Port Orange community, things like that. So that process, unfortunately, does take time.
Yeah, this will
It does take
require
time.
permitting through the St. Johns River Water Management District and the Army Corps of Engineers
Yeah.
as the two biggest permitting.
Yep. Anything else on this particular project? Go ahead.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about Sleepy Hollow Drainage Improvements Project. This one, again, we're estimating, in the year and a half time frame to design and permit, about a year and a half to construct. We're looking at the 90 homes estimated, and this is again a conservative estimate for 90 homes, and then you see the cost there. So for a point of reference, I'll zoom in again on this one. So I wish you could see the so if you can kind of follow the laser pointer, I know it's kind of zoomed out, so that's Jackson Avenue right there. Dunlawton kind of in this top corner here, and you have Nova Road that comes through here, and then this is Sleepy Hollow right here, and then this is our Publix Plaza right here.
That's where I grew up, right there.
So for this project, we're going to do some, when I say gravity system improvements, that's putting pipe in the ground. That's putting pipe in the ground, and the idea of putting the pipe in the ground is to route that water somewhere. So we're gonna do some looking at doing gravity systems along Jackson Street, and then down the west side of Sleepy Hollow, which would be the east side of the Publix Plaza, and then depending on whether we can get easements or not, we may continue down that east side or west side of Sleepy Hollow, or we may bring those gravity system improvements out onto Nova Road. And then we're also going to put some gravity system improvements within Sleepy Hollow to try to capture that water and bring it to our ponds. So currently, Sleepy Hollow has a small kind of linear pond directly south of development.
You able
and
to
then
zoom in on that at all?
just on the other side of that, I kind of am zoomed in as
Oh,
much
okay.
as it'll let me, really.
Okay.
And I do apologize. These are modeling level maps, so they're not really construction ready. So you do kind of have a zoomed out view. So there's the Sleepy Hollow pond, and then directly on the other side of that pond, there's an FDOT pond that the city actually owns that pond, and that pond takes the drainage from Nova Road, North Nova Road up to Dunlawton Avenue. So this project is going to take those ponds and combine them into one pond. So we're going to have one larger pond. We'll get a little bit of additional volume because you got about a 20-foot wide berm. So you take all that dirt out of there, you get a little bit more volume in your pond. And then once again, we're going to construct a stormwater pumping station kind of on the southeast corner around the Miles Drive area. And once again, we're going to take and we're going to pump. If you follow that purple line, this is where we're initially looking at pumping that water to. The city owns a small parcel of land down there. We're going to pump this water somewhere east of the railroad tracks into Rose Bay. We haven't completely identified where our outfall for this project is going to be, but it's going to be east of the railroad tracks into Rose Bay.
That would also be enclosed pumping?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So every time I'm talking about a stormwater pumping station, that's with a force main, and we call that a closed system. So that pipe is closed off until it discharges to its ultimate outfall.
And that'd be one way at its outfall.
One way at its outfall. Right. And again, this one it's 90 homes, but that's if you can kind of look at the dark blue, with the exception of the roads, most of Sleepy Hollow, we're not flooding homes. We're doing, again, what you call nuisance flooding or roadway flooding. And we can accept that. And this is at the peak of the flood.
Were there any I'm sorry, are you keep going?
That's the project.
Okay. In that particular area, were there any other opportunities identified where we could hold more water, even if it's temporary? I know there's a really large retention area there to the south of the project area, but any other areas that could be expanded, or didn't something happen there with those two ponds? Now they're one pond, and that's actually going to be helpful, we think? Or
So prior to Hurricane Milton, we were trying to pre-stage the pond in Sleepy Hollow, because these two systems, believe it or not, and I'm gonna have to zoom out to get the pointer back on it, but the Sleepy Hollow system discharges actually from this little pond down here. It goes north and then discharges through a ditch system out to the Halifax Canal, but the Nova Canal. And then the DOT system actually has a gravity outfall down Nova Road. So they're two separate outfalls. So what we were doing prior to Milton, as we were pumping that Sleepy Hollow pond to try to get as much storage volume available for that pond prior to the storm. What happened is we pumped that pond really, really good. We pumped the Sleepy Hollow pond so low that we had such a high difference. So the water level in the DOT pond is here, the water level in the Sleepy Hollow pond is here, and then we had a berm failure. So the water started slowly migrating through that berm, and eventually, a term we like to use is water always wins, and that water ate through that berm, and so now the two ponds are in essence one pond. So we're just gonna, for this project, we're just gonna finish that process. And this one will require a DOT cooperation and approval for us to do this project.
so then no other opportunities in that area for any additional retention that could
So
benefit,
so
right?
we did look at, there is some vacant land that we looked at, but because it's of low-lying nature, we didn't get a lot of storage out of that land.
Okay.
So currently Sleepy Hollow drained to the Nova Canal, which is already, as we know, the problem.
Correct. And that's part of the issue is again, in low tides or when the canal's down, the system works really well.
Oh, yeah, that's
But
great.
when it's burnt, when it's up at its banks and it's really, really high, it's, we kind of use it as you got a busy interstate, and you're trying to get on the on-ramp and there's just no way to get on. You got to wait for a break in traffic, and for the break in traffic is for the canal to go down before that water can get out of there.
It's an excellent plan.
That was that project. If you guys have any more questions, I'll go on to the next one.
Reed,
No, it's.
you know that area pretty well?
I do happen to know this area extremely well, considering I lived there and flooded twice. So, but no, I think it's a great approach. I wish there was, like Scott said, more options as far as storage goes, because it is the Nova Canal ultimately that kind of does Sleepy Hollow in, because there's just nowhere for that neighborhood's water to escape. And
Right.
so, it'd be like me taking this Gatorade and trying to pour it into this already full bottle of water. It's going to go everywhere.
Right.
And that's what's happened to us there. I think a big thing, like we've already talked about, especially something behind Publix, that whole ditch has always been problematic. I think you've known that from the 2 years you've been here. It ends up a lot of trash gets down in there from that complex.
Correct.
And I mean, the whole dumpsters, couches. I mean, literally, I cannot begin to tell you how much debris ends up in there, and of course, then ends up in the pipes and everything else. Staff's done a great job of cleaning it prior to the big storms. It's on any given day, you can walk out there, and even still right now, there's a huge portion of the roadway that is collapsed
Correct.
into this canal that's back there. So the whole thing is just it's got to be improved, and we know that. And I think this is the right step.
You bring up an excellent point in the Publix Plaza, and by no means am I throwing them under the bus or anything, but where that plaza is was one of the first big box developments in the city, again pre-1990. So if you notice something that's missing from that plaza, stormwater ponds.
There's not a single one.
Not a single stormwater pond for that whole plaza, and all of that water discharges to that small ditch behind Sleepy Hollow.
I'm
So-
just going to ask the question because I know I've asked it. I think I've asked it to you. I know I've spoken about it with Wayne. Would it be something for the city to try to approach them about purchasing a portion of the parking lot or something to build retention, or would it not be worth it anyway? Would it just be financially cost prohibitive? Because their whole parking lot flooded extremely.
Correct.
Because they have nowhere to store their water either.
And I don't know that they have a lot of available parking in that lot with all the infill that they've done along Nova Road there. That I think they're pretty much at their parking limit.
Gotcha. Okay.
And the design of the neighborhood, as you know, the original design, there were no retention areas
None.
to that. All the retention,
None.
like if you Google Earth this, you do see a few retention ponds in the outlier areas. Those were all built later. The one major area was done as part of the Dunlawton and Nova expansion to go to multiple lanes by the DOT.
And if you actually notice, if you're looking at the Sleepy Hollow box on the left half of this, and you notice there's another neighborhood that's in behind that, that's where
Right.
Miles Drive come in.
Right.
They have retention, and while they did have, I believe, 1 or 2 homes flood in there, it was not like Sleepy Hollow because they have a place for their water to go. But that's the difference in a neighborhood that was built in the 70s and 80s and one that was built in the early 2000s or late 90s.
They have a modern stormwater system in that neighborhood, and it functioned very well
It did.
through the storms.
That neighborhood was developed after 1990. Though.
Correct.
Those houses were built
Correct.
a lot
Correct.
later. I noticed that I've always drive by these lots. They've been for sale since I think I've been in real estate for 30 years. It's the one across from Oak Place Warehouse Park near our our water treatment plant. It's just north of Acorn Lane. It's a big piece of property. And then there's also behind the Winn-Dixie, there's a big piece of property on Spruce Creek. These are all west of Spruce Creek Road, but on Spruce Creek Road.
Right.
Would they not serve as storage holdings for, like, I mean, I just,
So some of that property is fairly expensive, and with really low groundwater. Again, I'll take you back to the if you only get a foot of storage in a 2-acre pond, that's 2 acre-feet of storage, and that's really not enough to make a significant difference for the amount of money you would pay for that piece of property.
I think that we looked at the one behind the Winn-Dixie. There's a lot of wetland on it,
Yes.
and it's not in the area that the Sleepy Hollow water flows. So, because we did consider that, it isn't where the water would go, and I think we might not, because it was hard to see on the picture, but the pump down there basically, as you said, you combine the 2 ponds, you get the extra capacity, and then you force that water east across the railroad tracks, across where Rose Bay, or where you go into Rose Bay from the Nova Canal, and go around all of that. So you're instead of this long path where it comes south of the neighborhood, over to the east, up to the top, through a smaller canal, and then has to sit and try to fight its way into the canal coming down, you're going to pull it south and shove it all the way east and push it out on the other side of the train tracks. That seems to be, I'm not the civil engineer here, so I get to generalize stuff, but getting it out seems to be the answer as you start looking at it. Just trying to hold it in holes in the ground, it seems to be a really losing battle, where if you can put it in the right spot and shoot it to the right spot, you get it out of that area, and it's not sitting there in people's houses. You're just pulling it and pushing it out of the way. So I was impressed when I saw that. I wasn't expecting there to be such a black and white solution here that could really make a difference. And I think 90 homes, that's really positive for that area.
Right.
So.
if with that pump being in place, let's say 3 years out, would that be a way to pump down that lake before it's coming? It's there in Fort Myers.
So-
Will we be able to start pumping?
So you have to be really careful pre-staging ponds, because if you pull a pond below the natural groundwater elevation, you start pulling groundwater into that pond, and when the groundwater comes in, you bring in a little bit of soil with it, and you can eventually have a slope failure. So you have to be really, really careful pre-staging ponds below existing groundwater elevations, because you can compromise the stability of the slopes.
It's been a common theme that people are telling me, I don't understand why you don't pump down that pond. Pump down that pond.
And so we were pumping down the Sleepy Hollow Pond, and we were
Yeah.
pumping that
Okay,
thing. I
you
mean,
were.
we had the
It
beach
was.
showing, right? It was almost empty, and then exactly what we were afraid of happened, was it destabilized the slope, and then the slope failed.
Yeah.
You can over pump. Well, first of all, there's only a handful of ponds out of the 500 in the city or whatever that can be mechanically pumped down. But the ones that can, if you pump them too low, you can create a bigger problem. And so, and when you pump them, a lot of times, you know, because we'll get phone calls where people are like, well, you know, the storm is 5 days out. Why aren't you pumping it down? If you pump it down too soon, it fills back up.
Right.
And so it's all about moving water and trying to create. You got to have somewhere to pump it to, number one. But it's all about creating capacity.
Forcing it down the river like we're gonna do
Right.
when it fills up.
So, question for you on the modeling, and maybe this is something for Kimley Horn to answer, but I'm just curious. It's an expensive project,
Right.
$17 million, right? So, thinking of other options, is it possible to take a neighborhood like that, like FEMA? Let's say FEMA in the state reenacted past programs where there was a lot of dollars to go in and purchase homes and properties that wanted to sell them and acquire those properties for creation of retention. Is there a way to model an area, draw a box around this area and say, okay, if that were to happen, how many homes or how much property would need to be acquired? Is that possible to model that? And I get what the city manager was talking about. You still got to pump it somewhere at some point, but can that be modeled to see if that could be helpful at all or not helpful at all?
So yes, that can be done. They'll model anything we ask them to model. Will it be effective or not? It's really hard to say. We would probably have, what we would start off is and go, okay, we're going to have to take 30% of that property and make it a pond, because that's kind of the go-to number because we have really high groundwater in this area. So again, you're not going to get a ton of storage out of that pond. So we would have to take 30% of that, and it needs to be contiguous. You can't do, hodgepodge, small little, quarter-acre ponds. You need to do, big contiguous ponds. So we could certainly
And you still
model
have to
that.
have the infrastructure that gets all the water into the pond.
Correct.
Just in general, when we were looking at some of the animation, it was like 35 or 40, like basically every house in the northwest corner of that subdivision
Right.
would have to come out in order to save the rest of them in the subdivision. That's, again, generalizing it because I don't have to worry about my PE.
You'd have to acquire 50 homes to benefit
Approximately.
another
Yes.
100.
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, if I could piggyback on what Wayne was saying a second ago about this force main, I think most people had similar issues that I noticed when it came to the flooding, and the animation that Kimley Horn did was awesome for showing this. Is that it was fine and the system was fine until it wasn't, and then when it went away, it seemed like somebody just pulled the drain plug. So what excites me the most about the force main, not only on this project but in the first project we talked about, is if you could just able to keep that water flowing. Even as rainfall is coming down, it seems to be there is capacity already there. It's just you need water movement, not capacity. At least that's what it felt like in the two times that I was flooded. It seemed like we were fine, and it was in the road, but that was okay. And then it went from being an inch or two in the road to a foot to next thing you know, it's a foot of water in everyone's home. And it seemed like it came in and went out just as fast.
Right.
And so, it seems like to me, these force mains, the water movement, because no amount of homes or land we're going to purchase is going to be equivalent to the capacity of the Halifax River and Rose Bay.
Correct.
So, but no, I'm very excited about both of the first two here projects.
So, Juno, on this note, and something that just turned my light on is Dunlawton Square. So we talk houses, but in reality, you got Dunlawton Square with however many thousands of square feet of blacktop that dumps into a ditch that's at Sleepy Hollow.
That's just on the correct. It's just on the west side of Sleepy Hollow, and then
But
goes on
that
the north
whole
side.
plaza dumps
That-
to that
That's
side.
That's correct.
Everything goes to the back of that store and into that ditch. And that's something I never really calculate, because you're talking about houses. And I just know, as an example, Sleepy Hollow has the worst soil there ever was. Because I remember when they built it, I was a kid, we were playing in the muck.
Be careful,
It has absolutely
I bought a big portion of that soil.
there's zero permeability in that, and I'm just sitting there thinking about all the things that calculate into this, and Sleepy Hollow is at a disadvantage already. It has no ponds, and it's got terrible soil,
Correct.
and it has no pitch. But now we're throwing Dunlawton Square into that. So when we model this repair or whatever, I think we need to include what all is going into that ditch and what all is going into the surrounding area of Sleepy Hollow. Have we done that?
Yes, that's included. And if you'll notice, I'll kind of zoom in on the Dunlawton Square. If you'll notice, a lot of their parking lot turns dark blue, and dark blue in these pictures is good. So a lot of that parking lot that was flooded initially turns dark blue. So we're taking a lot of that water from that plaza, and we're putting into our system, and we're pumping that out.
And did not,
Currently, we're pumping it into the Nova Canal, which is already dead. We're
It's
already
trying to gravity into
Yeah.
Nova Canal.
So we've got to, so bypassing that Nova Canals with this much water
Right.
is a big deal.
and there was so much water in Milton that the Dunlawton Square, there are some of the tenants flooded.
Right.
Like
Did they?
the parking lot was that high, and the water was that bad in the back of the canal that some of those tenants flooded. Which is why I brought up the conversation is whether or not they would be interested in storage themselves, and it becomes something where we maybe partner with them. But I don't want to go. I know it's a very slippery slope to go down. So
That's a conversation that people at your level might have to have.
yeah, and I'd be willing to do it if we sat down, you and I first, and talked
To
about
make sure it was feasible, absolutely.
Yeah. So maybe you and I will do that sometime.
Good.
Good to go to the next one?
Question, yes, carry on.
Okay, so this next one we call our Portona area. So for those that aren't familiar with Portona, that's our 2nd through kind of 6th Street. Sugar Mill Elementary's in the area. That our new Madeline Commons development is kind of adjacent to the Portona area. So we'll taking a look at this project again. We have our design permitting land acquisition, our construction time frame. Approximately 25 homes we're helping here. You'll see this is a much smaller number. Because this is one of those ones where, because of the land we had available to us, we are able to make a gravity solution work in this area. So the idea behind this project is you can see the areas that are hatched in yellow. We've identified those as potential stormwater pond areas. So the idea would be to collect the stormwater, route it to those ponds, let those ponds hold the water, and then slowly discharge that water east. One of the things of note on this one is once we get to the railroad tracks, we're going to discharge that, because that's where it currently goes. That water currently discharges underneath the railroad tracks, goes east into, it's called the Doherty Canal, the historic Doherty Canal, which goes under US 1, eventually outfalls at Riverwalk Park near the Chamber Building, where we have where our water goat's at. That's where all this discharges. So with this one, what we'll do is on the east side of the railroad tracks, we're going to put a backflow prevention device. So we're going to prevent, because that whole system's tidally affected, so we'll prevent the tide from coming back in here.
But it's not forced.
No, this is one of our gravity solutions. We're really proud of this one because we got a gravity solution to work. we tried gravity in all of them first, and this was one of the ones we do not have to pump this water
But regardless of the title?
because we're holding that tide back, and we have enough storage available to hold the water that is going to be generated, the runoff that's going to be generated from the area. We have enough.
Nice.
If we're able to put stormwater ponds in all these hatched areas, there's enough volume there to hold the water.
Do we own this land now?
We do not own any of this land currently.
Okay, Tom, again, so we have storage ponds. It's going to gravity feed to the river. It's got a backflow. So the pressure of the water in the pond is going to exceed the pressure of the tide, where it's going to let it go out, but not come back in.
So you hold your water through the storm, and you hold your water through the surge. And once the surge and the storm is gone, and the tidal conditions are back to normal, then you have what we call a drainage control or a discharge control device that will
Okay.
slowly let that water drain out of the pond
So
system.
it's not something that's active during the storm itself then?
Correct.
necessarily.
Is it correct? Is this also like, it's a smaller area and a smaller magnitude of, like, you wouldn't necessarily, even with this amount of land, be able to make the solutions work in some of the other areas because you're dealing with much higher amounts of water and larger areas. So it's also, because it's not the same scale or so, it's just like a Sleepy Hollow problem.
Excellent point. There's a much smaller contributing basin to this area that we're having to account for.
Okay, right.
And this one we're not getting Nova Canal spillover in this one or anything like that. So this is just really kind of localized with this area.
And these houses were developed a lot longer ago, 1950s.
This is one of the
60s.
oldest areas
Flat streets.
in the city, right?
I mean, just no elevation on the home.
Right.
Now, with the new subdivision that's been developed there, I noticed, I drove through there, there's over 30 There's over 30 inlets in that neighborhood. And that's going into their retention that they developed, and then where?
So that development has actually 3 places that it ultimately discharges water. So they hold all of their water. They hold their 11 inches in their ponds, and then they have actually 3 outfalls. So part of the outfall goes west to Sauls Avenue. So when you're developing a piece of property, you have to do a stormwater model. It's a much smaller scale than what Kimberly Horn did, but you have to do what they call an existing condition stormwater model. So you have to show before you develop that piece of property, where does the water go? So what the engineer who designed this showed was in the pre-development phase or stage that it went to 3 different locations. So some of it goes to Sauls, some of it actually discharges north up into a ditch system that goes up into South Daytona, and then part of it goes east into this. This ditch, part of it goes east into the ditch system the drainage system that's currently in the Portona area. So it's 3 different areas where it discharges. And another thing, whenever you're developing land in a subdivision like this, you have to model what your pre-development discharge rate was. So how many gallons per minute does your land discharge before you development? You're not allowed to discharge 1 single drop more of water in post-development than you are in pre-development. So you're holding all of that water, and you're only releasing in post-development what was released in pre-development.
And before, it would just hit that vacant lot and run wherever the heck gravity took it, right?
Right, it went 3 different locations when it hit the vacant lot. That's correct.
Yeah, there was no
control of
no
it.
lakes,
It
ponds,
could have,
retention.
it had no retention. It could have flowed into the neighborhoods. It could have wherever. It had the least, the path of least resistance.
Correct.
But you also have the capability of percolation.
Yeah, but not 20 inches of rain. At 10, yeah.
True, yeah.
Now these we don't currently possess these properties though,
That's correct.
but they are for sale, or
We've identified them as potential ponds. We haven't gone any farther with it than that. Anything else on this project?
Just a general comment on this particular project area. I think it's important for us to keep in mind that this is one of those areas where there are other projects outside of our jurisdictional boundaries that I believe would tremendously help this. I mean, if the Army Corps of Engineers and DOT can improve the Nova Canal system and the outfall project or the outfalls of all of that, because that's where a lot of this water comes from in this particular area.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, this Madeline Pepper Hill project, I mean, I think like Juno's, and I get it, why we want to be conservative.
Sure.
But when you put it all together, it all makes sense that when you start connecting some of these opportunities, even though not all of them are within our control, that I think the impacts could be even much significantly greater than we could anticipate. But it's good to look at things conservative.
Yes,
So
and that's an excellent point, because one of the things if you go back to the Madeline Pepper Hill or Sugar Forest project, a lot of that water currently flows through this area to outfall. We're going to intercept that water and pump it, so it doesn't have to get through here anymore. So that's even less water that we're going to have to deal with. So that gives us even more confidence in that this project's going to work.
and lastly on the properties that we're talking about there, just keep in mind when municipal government is always trying to acquire real estate, there has to be a strategy, and we got to give our staff time to put us in the best position for that. And I know that they are working on that, and that'll be enough said on that for right now.
Yes, thank you. On to the next one.
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
Okay, so the next one we call our Virginia Avenue drainage improvements. This project is located, so geographically, I'll switch to, we'll just go through the numbers real quick. Again, permitting timeframes, construction timeframes, estimated properties helped, and estimated construction cost. So geographically, let me put my pointer. So this is Dunlawton Avenue right here, going to the Dunlawton Bridge. This is Ridgewood Avenue right here. And then you have your railroad tracks right here. And Virginia Avenue runs parallel to the railroad tracks and just to the east. So this project is kind of a tag on to a project that we constructed in 2019, 2020. We put a couple of stormwater pump stations in, small stormwater pump stations, and some ponds up closer to Ridgewood. The one shortfall of this project was the gravity system, the collection system, the pipes to get it to the pond, they're not big enough. So when a gravity system, when a gravity pipe becomes over capacity, then that's when you have the standing water, and that water's flown to that pipe that's over capacity. So this project really is about getting more water to those ponds faster, and then since we're sending more water to those ponds, we have to make sure that the existing pumps can handle that additional flow. So it may involve some upsizing of some pumps and potentially looking at maybe an additional force main or something like that. But once we get into the farther into the design is when we can get into all that. But it's basically getting more water to our existing ponds and making sure our pumps can handle that additional water for this project.
If I remember right, Juno, we talked about this. This is just north of Epiphany's Catholic Church, and you got White
Place Park, yep.
And that was part of our Parks and Recreation bond, was to redo that park and the possibility of making a storage site there too.
Right.
So that's outside of what is actually being shown here. This is part of it separately that can aid to this project.
And also, if you look at the map, you see the purple dots kind of along the east side of Ridgewood. Those are all backflow prevention devices. Kind of what I was talking about before. You try to prevent that water from going west of US 1, our natural dam running north-south through the city.
Can I ask why these maps don't have the light blue and the dark blue that we've seen on some of the other maps?
I had one for this, but it was just because of the scale of the drawing, it was really hard to see.
Okay, thank you.
It was just a visual thing.
Yep. No.
Just in the 2019 project that was executed here, that was 2 additional retention ponds, right? One off of Fox Place and...
It was actually 3 ponds.
3, right?
Yeah, it was
'cause
3
there's
additional
one-
ponds and 2 pump stations.
Yeah. Just looking at this on Google Earth and trying to do some rough calculations, it looked like we added a little over 40,000 square feet of retention pond space. Sound about right?
That's pretty reasonable.
Pretty close to that.
So just under an acre, because an acre is 43,560 square feet. One of those numbers, as an engineer, you have to memorize. Did I get it right, guys?
Even planners know that.
Tricky thing in this area, it seems, is that Ridgewood hurts us because that acts as a natural berm to keep water from flowing into the river.
So
Is that-
so it
is
hurts
that-
us.
yes,
It hurts
no?
us and helps
So you
us
have a
in a way.
storm
So
surge.
it kind of does act as that natural
true.
berm.
Yeah.
So it doesn't allow that water to completely inundate on the west side, and which is why we put those backflow devices in.
A lot of what we've been talking about is rainfall. We
Right.
haven't been talking about storm surge.
Right.
So, we can get storm surge without rainfall.
And unfortunately, those properties east of US 1 and south of Dunlawton, there's not a lot we can do for those because the river's right there.
Yeah.
Absent building big flood walls and things like that, billion-dollar projects, there's not a lot we can do in that part of town.
So this is really retention.
This
Mostly in this area.
project is really a collection system to get more water to the ponds and then pumping that water to the river.
Okay.
Similar to it's basically just making that existing project a little bit better.
Okay. Questions on this one?
Good on that one.
Oh, yeah.
Nope.
All right, we're getting there. So this is another one that the name is long and wordy, but we're calling it Spruce Creek Woods Drive and Sweetwater Hills Drainage Improvements. For point of reference, let me get to the map here. Oops, I went the wrong way. Sorry about that. Yep, I went to the map. Sorry about that. So this is Tumblebrook Drive here. This is Hensel Road here. This is what we call King's Landing, the new development there. So this is just to the west of there. So this is part of the city that's actually not in a low-lying area. It's got some interesting topography in the area. This is the area where we have some of our higher elevations. And what we found when we were modeling this and what we found when we talked to some of the residents over there is the area to the north along Spruce Creek Woods Drive is higher to the point where the water actually flows down to Tumblebrook Drive and kind of exacerbates the issue down there, makes it a little bit worse.
Yeah, that area's shaped like a bowl.
Yeah, it's absolutely a bowl down there. So the idea behind this project is to intercept that water with collection system before it has a chance to flow down to Tumblebrook Drive, and through pipes. Then this is gravity, this part. So through pipes And then it's not shown on here, but here, I'm gonna turn my pointer back on real quick so you guys can see. So this right here, if you can see where the laser pointer is, that's the southern end of the B19 canal right before it goes into Spruce Creek. So this project again is collection system on Spruce Creek Woods Drive, route that water west into the B19, and down in the Sweetwater Hills, we have a small pond at the bowl, and we have a diesel power or a Thompson pump there that we've used for a long time to try to keep that area dry, and it works fairly well. It definitely has some limitations. The force main is slightly undersized. It's only a 6-inch force main, so we can't push as much water as we need to. And then because it's a diesel power pump and it's got some rudimentary floats on it, it's got some inherent issues, mechanical issues. Like for Hurricane Milton, we actually had that pump fail because there was water got into the fuel system and caused the engine to stop running. So this project, we're gonna take that existing diesel pump station, construct a pump station with electric pumps, like we're looking at all, and then we'll back this up with generators. So we're going to basically improve the pump station, slightly oversize that force main, make that probably a 10 or 12-inch force main, so we can move as much water as we need. And then we own an existing pond on the west side, kind of near where the yellow area is, and we've identified that area as potential additional pond to hold some water prior to discharging to B19, because one of the unique things about this project is it does discharge directly to Spruce Creek, and Spruce Creek is an impaired water, so we have to do some water quality component to this project, which means we have to try to clean that water before we discharge. So the caveat to that being, when we're in a flooding condition, you bypass your water quality. But the other 99% of the time, when it's just a standard stormwater system, you run it through some sort of water quality component. There's some pretty unique and pretty interesting things you can do. You have these baffle boxes that have this naturally occurring, it's nutrient consuming bacteria that goes in there, so it consumes and really we're looking at nitrogen and phosphorus. That's when we say pollutant removal, we're looking at to remove the nutrients in the form of nitrogen and phosphorus.
So we're gonna have to catch rainwater, filter it,
Yep.
then put it in the river.
And then put it in the river during normal conditions. With this system, if we are in an emergency situation where we're having to pump the water to keep homes from flooding,
Right.
we do not have to route it through that water control for the water quality.
Now, this project wouldn't benefit from any of the other improvements on the B19 because this is so far off, we'd be pumping into it.
Right, and this is downstream of that weir device that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
So this isn't the part of the B19 that flows freely. I think Councilman Grubbs said it correctly. When that weir is really ripping over there at Taylor Road, it's literally probably Class 2 rapid running down right downstream of that weir. So.
Gotcha. Okay.
Anything else on this?
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No? Oh, I just want to make sure. Okay, so Cambridge Canal. So this is, so we did identify some improvements we could do to the Cambridge Canal Basin. But before I go through those, I want to give you an update on the project that we're currently under design for, because that's really the most important project we're working on down there. So I'm going to advance to the next slide. And this really just shows the improvements that we're looking at doing there. So if you look at the area of the laser pointer, this is the area of our berm that failed during Hurricane Nicole. And what happened during Hurricane Nicole is we have this area to the north, which is connected to Rose Bay underneath the railroad tracks. The water came up so high and with such force, it flowed back into our pond, up over our berm, and eroded it from the backside, and that's what caused the failure. So that was that tidal surge. So with this project, we're gonna increase the height of that berm approximately 3 feet.
If you don't mind, and if you don't have well, I know you do. Can you just, so this area, this particular project area didn't exist prior to 2004.
Correct.
So if you could just recap the history of this area, because I think it's important for us to know that this was a very large, probably the largest that I'm aware of in the city ever, of a stormwater mitigation project, and it has worked. It has made significant improvements to the area, but it needs to be better. And I
That-
think that's what we're doing. If you can just kind of touch base on that, I
That's
think
correct.
that's important.
I wasn't
for
here at the
council to
time,
know.
but post 2004, there was some flooding down in this area. So the city at that time, they actually constructed 3 different. So there's Cambridge Canal North, Cambridge Canal Central, and Cambridge Canal South projects they did. This is part of the Cambridge Canal Central project that involved constructing these large stormwater ponds and constructing a pump station to take the water from the Cambridge Canal north of Taylor Road all the way through the canal system and pumping it out to Rose Bay. So as the tides have gotten higher and the surges have gotten higher, there was a weakness that was exposed, right? And the weakness that was exposed was, even though we're still pumping the water, we pumped into a trough right here and then relied on gravity to take that water out underneath the railroad trestle and into Rose Bay. And so what would happen was when the bay would come up to a certain point, the Army Corps of Engineers and St. John's River Water Management District required us to put a failsafe on it. So when that bay reached a certain elevation, there was a float. And when we went into what we called high bay, it disabled the pump station. So the pumps turned off once the bay came up. And we did not have a choice in that. That was not our choice. We were forced to do that. So the bay comes up, pump station's turned off. And then during Nicole, so we went through Hurricane Ian and we experienced that. Bay got really high, probably 7, 8 o'clock at night, pumps turned off. There's nothing we can do about it because the bay is literally in the pond. So they become one.
The project's underwater.
And this
Project's
is,
underwater.
And this is by order of the Army Corps of Engineers.
That's correct. So we have operational conditions of that pond that we had to operate under.
You'd be pumping a circle.
Right. That'd be like if your bathtub flooded into your bathroom and the water level was at the same. That'd be like trying to pump out of your bathtub. You're basically pumping the water to nowhere. So that's kind of the history of how it got there, and then how one of the unfortunate limitations that when they and this was a fantastic project. They did almost everything right when they did this project. I think the one thing that maybe they had a little bit of short-sightedness in, and they didn't have a citywide model or a master plan they were working off of. They were working off of what they thought was going to work, right? And it really did for the most part. But having that northern berm low like it was and relying on gravity was the limitations of the project. And kind of going back to the very beginning of the presentation, when we were talking about the outfalls, the map we showed with the purple arrows and the blue arrows, and I kind of pointed out the 2 arrows that kind of come together in one point. So that's this. So if you'll see where the Cambridge Canal pump station is, you can kind of see the ponds on the bottom of the picture. On the top of the picture, that's where the Nova Canal discharges into there. So we have our Nova Canal discharging under Nova Road into this little creek system, and our Cambridge Canal pump station pumping to that exact same location. So post Hurricane Ian, we went out and we made some temporary repairs. We put in a large sandbag berm, and we piped in one of our pumps to pump around that berm, so we had some pumping capacity in that. And when we're testing that system, myself and the Deputy Public Works Director, Brett Matter, we're like, we want to see what's going on, right? So we got some kayaks, and we got in kayaks, and we kayaked out into that little bay area. We kayaked underneath the trestle. We had a really slight incoming tide, so a really light incoming tide, and we turned that pump station on and let it pump for 30, 45 minutes. And what we saw was none of that water went under the trestle. That water just kept going north and kept snaking up north. So that was kind of our aha moment. It's like, we just found something that that might only be hurting the situation from the Nova Canal. So that's when we made the decision on this project. Go back a slide. Is instead of letting this just naturally flow out to the north and naturally going underneath the trestle, we're gonna pipe those 3 pumps together. Basically, each one of them is gonna have a pipe. They're gonna come together to a common header pipe, and that pipe is gonna be 72-inch pipe. So as tall as I am, I'm gonna be able to stand up in that piece of pipe. That's a big piece of pipe, right?
I want that photograph.
Before-
It's turned on.
And then we're gonna pump that water east underneath the railroad tracks. And so anybody we've ever talked to, all the historical data we looked at, we've never had water over the railroad tracks down there. So if we can get that water underneath the railroad tracks and build our berm up to the height of the railroad tracks, we can in essence keep the bay out of our pond which we need to do so we can actually pump stormwater, not bay water, and then we're going to pump it east underneath the railroad tracks. So we're not fighting that Nova Canal water, because right now we're pushing our pump water into that Nova Canal water and probably compounding the situation and making it a little bit worse. So, and that's really kind of why this project has been a little bit more difficult to permit, because once you get east underneath this railroad tracks, then you're in an estuary that's governed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and you have to follow their procedures. And when you permit with the Army Corps of Engineers, they are required to distribute your permit application to like 8 other federal agencies for review. And none of these agencies have time periods for review. So the FWC, there's a bunch of different agencies that look at your permit application, and they don't have to give you a timely review or timely response. We were very fortunate because we made our initial submittal right around the time of Milton, kind of unfortunate timing, and we've already got our first round of comments back from the Army Corps of Engineers. We had 3 comments back from the Army Corps, and none of them are going to derail the project. So as soon as we received those first comments, we immediately proceeded. So I'll take a step back, I'm sorry. So whenever you get to a point in your design, we're about 60% designed, that's when you go talk to the Army Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps of Engineers won't talk to you when you just have an idea.
Right.
They say, come back to me with what you're going to do. So we get to about 60% design, and then we meet with the Army Corps of Engineers. They told us the parameters that we had to permit by, and so we submitted our permit application at that point. Received our first set of comments back from the Army Corps with no deal breakers. We need to provide them a little bit more detail on our outfall structure and a couple other minor details. So as soon as we got those comments back, we're heading to 90% design right now. So we're not waiting to get a permit to finish the design. We're gonna go ahead and finish that design. So we're gonna try to time it to get our Army Corps permit approximately when we finish design, which we're anticipating being in the fall of this year. And then by the time once we have the 100% design, then we can start the bid process. The bid process is a couple of months long, because you have to put the project out to bid. It's got to stay out to bid for 60 days, get your bids in, analyze your bids, award the contract. So we're looking at starting construction on this project at the first of the year of 2026.
So the question always comes down, from what I've always heard and learned, is FEC going to let us go underneath the railroad tracks?
So believe it or not, FEC was the first people we contacted, because FEC will talk to you with just an idea. Mm-hmm. So they were one of our first pre-application meetings, and FEC, as long as we design to their standards, basically what FEC is looking for you is they don't want you to affect their ballast of their tracks, which is that big rock, basically the berm that their tracks are built on. So as long as we don't affect their ballast, we can go underneath their tracks. But that's going to be just getting underneath the railroad tracks is a massive project.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking
sure.
about, because we're going to take that 72-inch pipe and we're going to split it back up into 2 smaller pipes, because it's more realistic to get on the tracks with smaller pipes. And then you got to do jack and bores underneath the railroad tracks. So we're going to even probably have to fill in a little portion of our pond just to get the pipe underneath the tracks. So it's really a massive civil project. And
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do the railroad tracks have to be closed down for any period of time while we're operating there? Because I can't imagine them ever letting that happen.
So you can do a right of entry permit. So whenever we surveyed the area, so we had to get survey of both sides of the tracks. There's a process you go through with the FEC. They have flagmen out there. You have to be out there between certain periods so you don't affect them. So you can be in the track corridor, but all of our work, so the beginning of our jack and bore and end of our jack and bore, are outside of their right of way. So
Okay.
they will be in operation the whole time.
Okay.
I know on your document here, it's got estimated number of properties helped by this is 8.
So,
that's talking about that.
I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
So back to the stormwater master plan now. So I took us off the stormwater master plan because I thought it was important to give you an update on where we were at with that project, because I know that project has a lot of interest, and I know that's a very important project that we try to get done as quickly as possible, so I wanted to make sure you had an update on where we're at. So the project that we identified in the master plan is really nothing more than, so we've identified a couple of pinch points in that canal system. So this project, where we only show helping a handful of homes, that's really going in and looking if we can really maximize the efficiency of the canal system and remove that pinch point that we've identified. So the number is misleading, because that little project isn't really going
Right.
to do a bunch, but it's going to help with the efficiency of
But
it.
overall, what we're talking about doing in that Cambridge project to enhance this and improve it, we're talking
Hundreds of homes
Hundreds.
with the project I was talking about
Quite
before.
possibly thousands if it's going to benefit the
Right.
Nova Canal.
Well, this canal system is in a separate basin,
Okay.
so it's completely separate.
I thought when you're talking about the
Oh,
Cambridge.
no, absolutely, you're actually right, because we're not forcing water to Nova Canal. Good point.
Right. So that was what I was saying, is that it actually stands to benefit the most, because we all know the Nova Canal is a huge problem.
I try to undersell these projects so that I can actually deliver on what I sell.
I appreciate that.
Juno's, it's hard to wrap the brain around something here. So conceptually, is water really coming outside of Port Orange through the Nova Canal system, as far away of Daytona, Holly Hill, maybe even Ormond, and getting discharged this far south into our city?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, it might be a small percentage because I
Yes.
know there's some other outfalls, but that,
Absolutely.
just to say that, and I know that's what we've talked about and that's what we hear, but that truly puts. So this is the bottom of the funnel.
This is the end
is
of the
the
line,
end.
right? Yes, and that's an excellent point. So it does, and you're right. Not all of the water that lands in Ormond Beach into that system ends up to us, but some of it certainly does.
But there's only like 6 outfalls from Ormond all the way to here, isn't there, total?
It's 3 outfalls.
Three.
Yeah, 3.
Yeah.
So,
So you know that water's coming here.
Yeah,
our work down here ultimately could benefit them up there.
it could. Yes.
Good, let's send them a bill.
Well, even with the pump systems that they put in at Reed Canal many years ago to improve outfall through Reed Canal,
Right.
You've still seen, like in those major rainfall events, you can still see the water passing through that, just right on by that pump system.
Well,
Right.
once it gets
It's just-
above that flapper door at Reed Canal, it can't go back out. It can't go to the river.
Right.
It closes off. That door closes
Right.
off.
Juno, the reality is we've got some beautiful engineering and problem solving developed by multiple individuals. You've laid it out. My question to you is, with Volusia 386, the Resilience Florida and things of that nature, sharing some of this engineering to the cities to the north of us so they can help build canal systems like what we're talking about. If we're sharing engineering, and I'm not speaking for y'all up here, but if we're sharing engineering so they don't have to go out and spend the money, Holly Hill, Daytona, South Daytona, whoever's above us that's sending us their water, it will ultimately help us in the long run, sharing that information to them and engineering to them so we can mitigate the water before it gets to us.
That's correct, and that's where the county through their basin studies, they're performing basin studies not just for us.
Correct.
I think I talked to Ben Bartley, who's a public works director there. I think he said he has like 12 or 13 of these basin studies throughout the county he's going to do. So he's absolutely we're going to go all the way up the East Coast and the Nova Canal. South Daytona is going to have some. The county's going to help them with that. So the sharing of the engineering part of it is really coming through the county at this point through that
Okay.
Transform 386. But that's an excellent point.
All right.
All right.
Go right ahead.
Our next project is Commonwealth Boulevard and Ridgewood Avenue Pump Station outfall. Um,
Oh wait, I'm sorry. He's going to hang out after the meeting. You can ask him. I mean, we're not going to. Yeah, we can't do that in the formality of the meeting. So that's okay. After the meeting, we can talk about it. If you have something you want to clarify, go ahead.
Thank you. So the Commonwealth Boulevard and Ridgewood Avenue Pump Station outfall improvements. I'll go. So we have the standard design and permitting, construction. Not a large benefit for this project, but still was one of the area of interest. So this project, if we look at the location, so you'll see if you can, it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but there's an area in green that's hatched, and the area that's yellow that's hatched. Commonwealth Boulevard kind of goes between those. Ridgewood Avenue is on the right-hand side, and I believe it's the turn now. Is it that corner? So that's kind of getting you on the map, so to speak. So this project is a couple of different things. So this is the B23 canal that we're talking about, another county canal on the east side. So in this one, we're gonna look to do some collection system improvements or adding some pipes or improving that canal system to get more water to this pond. city currently owns this pond right here. We're going to outfit this pond with a pump station again to pump that water from the B23 out east into the Halifax River. And then heading south from, so this is heading south of the pump station. We're also going to do some additional improvements south on the B23 to try to improve flow to the south. And eventually we have a natural outfall. It's old Fosford Road right of way. I don't know if anybody really is familiar with that, but we're going to use that existing right of way as now. It's already an existing outfall point, but we're going to improve that outfall there with this project. So,
Okay.
so canal improvements, pump stations to the north, canal improvements, improved gravity outfall to the south. That's what this project entails. And this is another one of those projects that's going to have probably some outreaching effects that we didn't account for in our numbers.
Any questions on that particular one, gentlemen?
Wearing you down.
That was more cut and dry.
All right.
It was more cut and
We're getting
dry.
close.
Yep.
All right, so the next one is we're calling our Southwind Ponds outfall improvements. And so the unique thing about, and sorry, I jumped ahead. So this is our standard, design time, construction time, a decent amount of improvement with this one, and yet another fairly high cost for this one. So this is one of the projects where we had a couple of areas of interest that we combined into one project. So the unique thing about our Southwinds Pond is it's in what we call a closed basin. So that Southwind Pond does not have anywhere it currently has nowhere to discharge to. So it fills up and it fills up and it just sits there.
Right.
It doesn't go down and it takes forever for it to go down. So the idea behind this one is, again, we're gonna go, here's Madeline Avenue is, let me get back to my pointer. I assume you guys know exactly where these are because I do. So back in this corner, this is kind of where the Walmart Neighborhood Center is. This is Madeline Avenue here, and this is the Southwind development here. So on the south side of Madeline Avenue is Viking Drive, and Viking Drive has some drainage issues. It was an area of interest, but it wasn't a big enough area to really kind of rate its own project, so to speak. So we're going to collect that water on Viking Drive and route it to that Southwinds Pond. Might on the surface seem like a bad idea, but what we're going to do is so we have an existing, and this is going to get probably a little more confusing than it needs to be, but we have an existing, what we call a reclaim augmentation station. So back in the years when the city was experiencing drought and we were trying to expand our reclaim system, what we would do is we would pump water from ponds into our sewer system and have that go to the wastewater plant to generate reclaimed water because we needed more reclaimed water to water yards with. Those pump stations ultimately did not function as designed because when you needed the water the most, the ponds were too low to pump out of. So you could only pump the ponds down to a certain area, and whenever the conditions were really dry, the ponds were too low. So most of the reclaimed augmentation stations have since been abandoned. This is one of those areas where we had a reclaimed augmentation station, so we already have a little bit of infrastructure there. We have a wet well there, so we could potentially outfit that wet well with some stormwater pumps and pump that and instead of pumping to the sewer system, we're going to take that water and pump it east. So this is Atlantic High School's on the north side. So we're going to pump it kind of parallel to the southern property boundary for Atlantic High School. And then if you see the big vacant piece of property outlined in orange, we own that piece of property. That's a City of Port Orange owns that piece of property. It's almost a 30-acre piece of property, so it's pretty sizable. So the thought was that the plan is to dig a large holding pond, so the water that doesn't drain out of Southwinds Pond will pump to this big pond, and we're just going to hold that water there. Once the storm is gone, the floodwaters go away, then we can slowly release that water because it eventually does ultimately outfall to the Nova Canal system, and we're going to design this project so that we're not going to be discharging to the Nova Canal while the storm's going on because we have this area, the land is actually fairly high, so we get a decent 4 or 5 feet of storage before we hit groundwater, so we can get a lot of storage out of this piece of property.
Be a good use for that piece of property.
It's an excellent use, and probably have a little walking trail or something around it too.
Any questions on that project area?
No.
I was gonna say, June, I know me and you've talked about this quite a bit. As soon as I became a councilman, I got a good phone call from a resident in that area, and as soon as you turn on to South Winds, it's a lake.
It is, and that water just doesn't go anywhere, so it's a really difficult situation, because then you have to pump that water somewhere.
And you get right there at the stop sign and the stormwater drain,
Right.
and you go, okay, where's it go? And then you follow it through permission of citizens to go through their yard, and here's the lake, that south side lake. It's like, okay, so you take your truck, you drive around to the back side. Well, I know y'all see a road on this here, but when it rains, there's no road. It's
Right.
the two lakes join to make one lake.
And so for this one, for post Hurricane Ian, we were desperate for solutions. So we saw that the Atlantic High School stormwater system wasn't full. So we went to high school and said, hey, can we pump some water to your pond? So they let us do that, and we were able to pump that pond down, and it actually worked, and we didn't overwhelm their system. So that really is what kind of like spurred the idea for this project. Like we can effectively, and it's not a lot of water that we have to pump to get the water out of the house and roads here.
Yeah, it's just enough to be in that cul-de-sac area and 15, 20 homes that are just inundated every time it rains.
Right.
And nobody should have to deal with that.
Who does that big pond belong to?
So if you look at the big pond is owned by the city.
Okay.
That's a city-owned pond.
We built that after that community was developed.
That's correct. That was we expanded that pond and took ownership of it.
Right, okay, I remember that, because the South Winds was built with no retention, right?
Correct.
Crazy. But go ahead.
And what year was South Winds built?
80s.
Probably right before right
Before 1990.
Yeah, right
Yeah.
before 1990.
Early 80s.
So we own that one.
That's correct.
And what about the small one to the south?
The small one is their pond.
Okay, all right.
But when it rains, it's everybody's.
It-
Yeah.
The road in the middle goes away and it turns into one big
Yeah.
pond. It's everybody's
One-
water
one
at that
lake.
point.
Gotcha, okay. Anything else on this one, Bill?
Sense to me.
Spruce
Okay.
Creek Road drainage improvements.
So this, I believe, is the final project for the evening we're going to talk about. We're calling this our South Spruce Creek Road. So this is an area, I'll go through the time frames, the relatively low number of houses, and a fairly decent cost on this one. But for a point of reference, the top, that's Central Park Boulevard, and then Spruce Creek Road's coming down through it. So this project involves, again, some collection system improvements on the northern part of it. So collection system improvements here, getting water, so we're going to take water north to Central Park and then east. And this we're going to get it into what they call the Cambridge Canal South improvements. So these improvements, there was improvements put in this area with the Cambridge Canal. And at the very, very east side of here, just west of the railroad tracks, we have a pump station there. It's a large 12-inch Thompson pump, so it moves a bunch of water, and so we can effectively pump water. So we're going to put more water there. We're going to take a lot of this water from here, route it north to that pump station. So we will have to make some pump station improvements, maybe a larger pump. We may even look at putting a permanent pump station there with electric pumps with a diesel backup generator. We're a little bit site constrained there. We only have an easement back to there, and it's really tight to get back in there, so we're going to have to be kind of creative with how we get to that pump station. And then the southern part of this project, I'll zoom in a little bit so it's easier to see. The southern part of this project is, again, we're going to do some gravity system improvements along Spruce Creek Road, which involve taking some of the culverts on the side roads, making them bigger so we can flow more water. And we're going to get it down to, wish I had the pointer on the zoomed in. So this is Golden Pond right here. Golden Pond Estates, I believe, is the name of the development.
Okay, yep.
So the Spruce Creek Road right away down there, we have a large area on the west side of the road that the city owns, and we're going to take that and basically turn it into a long linear pond system, put a pump station in, common theme, and then pump that water from that part of the project south to Spruce Creek. So this one is kind of a take the water to the south, pump it south, take the water to the north, take it up to our pump station and pump it east.
Any specific questions on that
Going
one?
back up to the pumping north, is it the Central Park and then east?
Yes, Central Park. So this is all gravity, and the pump station is at the very east end up against the railroad tracks. So if you go to the south end of Trailwood Drive, and then go, we actually have to access this pump station through someone's piece of property. We have an access easement through there, so that's why the site's kind of difficult. But there's a pump station back there.
Gotcha. And that Pendry Drive has some issues with some flooding, didn't it?
So we
It's
didn't.
supposed to be the street though.
But yeah, I think that was primarily street
In the
flooding.
street.
We haven't had a lot of residents contact us from that area. We had more residents contact us from the area along Spruce Creek Drive,
Gotcha.
Spruce Creek Road, I think, in that area actually.
All right, I know we're not done.
That
but-
takes us to the beginning.
I know, right? So we're not done, but we got to take a short break. 'Cause as my dad would say, my eyeballs are starting
Mayor,
to flow.
that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you.
Good. For you, maybe.
Yes.
So let's take a quick 5 minutes and come back, and then
Great job.
we're going to bring it back to council for some thoughts and questions, and talk to the city manager about where we go from here. Okay? 5 minutes.
Yes.
All right, we're gonna bring this back here to council for some additional comments. Just a couple things that I wanted to make mention of. And Wayne, I guess this you can touch base on all of these projects. We have timelines written into the projects. I just want to make sure that we're being clear about what those timelines mean. I'm trying to find one here. So, like, if you look at Virginia Avenue drainage improvement, it says estimate of design and permitting timeframe. Tracy, take your time, brother.
I got it.
You're here. 12 months estimated time of construction timeframe. That's not today, right? That's meaning there's funding, and we give that project the green light to go forward. Right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the clock starts.
Weigh in on that, or
The clock starts when the funding is available to start the process. So when you award a contract for design, that's what that's for. When you
Okay.
award a contract for construction.
all right. And I just wanted to be clear about that because as we're kind of going through this, and I really do like, I really like the idea of our team going into the community, because every one of these projects is different. Even though I know the theme tonight seems to be pump to the river, pump to the river, pump to the river. It's great, but they're all different in how this is going to have to be executed and how it's going to work out. So I do really like that idea a lot, that we go into these areas and that we can spend more time, and folks are going to have questions, and they can pick Junos's brain, and what about this and what about that, which we've done a lot of already, and we've already ruled out a lot of things that can't be done, because to our surprise, my surprise, you just think, well, we just need more retention, and the realization is that we can't create enough retention in these areas. Those Robin, I don't know, are you able to pull up those Google Earth images I sent? Do we have those, or no? It's okay, it's fine. But if you look at Google Earth, and you look at these areas like Beacon Woods, for example, which is over there behind
Yeah, Albertsons.
where the old Albertsons used to be,
Street.
that kind of stuff. You look at those neighborhoods, hundreds of homes, no retention whatsoever. In fact, that particular community, I got a lot of phone calls about talking about how the retention pond adjacent to that neighborhood isn't enough. Well, that retention pond doesn't even serve that neighborhood. That was done by DOT. So there's nothing coming out of that neighborhood. And so it started making sense to me through conversations with the engineering team and staff that you're not going to retention your way out of this. You're just not. You're not going to be able to acquire enough property. And even then, in a lot of areas, the retention wouldn't be sufficient enough to hold enough water. So it becomes pretty evident that you're going to have other plans, which are incredibly expensive plans, and they're going to take a long time and a lot of engineering and design to be able to execute these. So I just want to make sure that it's important as we go into the communities and we talk about these time frames, that they know these time frames are not press go today.
Yeah.
These are time frames as we work to being able to get funding and move these projects off our list one at a time and get to them, that's what it will take once that point gets to each of those projects. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean there are not other things that we can do that aren't part of these projects. There are other things in the community. I know Junos was just having a conversation with one of our residents. There are other smaller things that we're going to be doing and we've always done to look at the little small problem areas that we can fix quickly and get those underway without more engineering, more design, more permitting, and things like that. And so stuff like that, we'll always be working to do that. And so I just want to make that point clear. Anybody have any other questions for Junos? I mean, we had to take a break. Did you want to come back up for just a second? So I had to take a quick break, but if we've got some more questions, we're here. We're working tonight, so let's.
So Wayne, back to the statement about time frames, okay? And let's just take an example is Sugar Forest, okay? We're saying, okay, we're going to start design in 2025, okay? And so that money, the money for design, we've already allocated.
Yes, sir.
Okay, but then once we get through design, then we go to the bid process and we go to contract type process. That's when the rest of the money has to be either in place or the project stops until we go get the money, correct?
And this is the project that we have the legislative appropriation, so that would put about $3 million into the pot. We have also, we're getting close to the time we'd be eligible for the Resilient Florida matches from that as well. We also have, we have been, every time we get money now back from one of the storms, so we got an Irma, about $1 million from Irma, we put that into a pot to hold. We have the property on Reed Canal we're trying to sell that would close this summer. We would put that in the pot. So we're starting to build funding
$25
up
million?
for that. Not 25, but we're starting to build up parts of it to be able to do the construction of them. And then you get the match. That becomes our match to the Resilient Florida project. Some of these too is once we got them done and prioritized, when we know what the cost benefits are, we'll put them in the CIP as part of the budget. So we'll be looking at the long-term construction in that. And at that point, you can decide, do you want to go down a grant because we've done that with parks in the past. If you can get a grant, you build a park. You can't get a grant, you don't. So we chose to go down a bond process. So you've got options to look at other things if you choose. You can borrow, you can do bonds as well for stormwater, depending on what you want to do. But those finance discussions would be part of budgeting processes, so you can look at the overall how we're running the city.
Because I look at it like this, and again, excuse me.
No, jump in, go ahead.
Okay, here's Sugar Forest, and again, this does something for the residents as well, when we talk about the commitment of the city and how serious we as a city are. Here's Sugar Forest, and we're estimating $25 million for 400 homes. It equates to about $62,500 a home. But you go to some of these other projects, now you go to Sleepy Hollow, you got $17.5 million for 90 homes. Now we're at $195,000 a home. You get up to some of these other ones, you know, Portona, we're at $208,000 per home. We keep going, you got $1 million a home that we are investing to save 12 homes. That's a lot of money.
Conceptually.
Conceptually. I mean, and the price just keeps going up. I mean, Spruce Creek Woods, $477,000 a home to help 22 homes. That's a lot of money.
Those are the ones where you're also going to want to consider your options through Elevate Florida, Transform 386, the FEMA HUD, various sources to help individual homes.
Yeah, because I'm just looking at those numbers, and I'm looking at these numbers just skyrocketing, you know, and in the Commonwealth area, as an example, it's $17 million for 17 homes.
And to some extent, the planning exercise is important to be able to help understand that. Like if you were just to start it the day after the hurricane and say it's going to be too expensive to fix, you're not going to have that credibility.
Yeah.
So if you go through the modeling process and show them what it takes and say this is what we're going to do, the community can decide, you know, what will we do. It just may be the area where we try harder to do individual homes, because at $2 million a home, maybe that's not the most pragmatic approach to go forward, but the exercise allows you to see this is what it will take to stop that from happening.
Right, and I guess that's what I'm getting at, is saying, okay, here we're able to identify these areas, what it takes to help these homes, and so now looking at the cost, is that cost feasible to go in and do that, or is there another option that we might have to look at? So, yeah.
Well, and that is going to be
It's gonna be tough.
extensive conversation and hard decisions that this council and councils in years to come are going to have to make.
Yeah.
Is you are going to realistically have to look at something, because here's the other side, is when we're trying to acquire funding from these other mechanisms, these other, you know, government agencies and resources, it's got to make sense on their end as well.
Yeah.
You're not going to go to a lot of these agencies and say, hey, I need $15 million because I want to keep
15 houses.
I want to keep $10 million worth of property from flooding.
Right.
They're gonna look at you like you got three heads. That's just not gonna happen.
Right.
So there is gonna be some really hard decisions and hard and conversations to have, and we'll get to every single one of those.
Yeah.
I think what we're gonna have to look at is, and this is good that we're having this right now, because I kind of wanted to have a generalized funding conversation, not to make any decisions tonight, but I think what we should look at is, right now we have some irons in the fire. We are actively pursuing funding that we feel good about, that we think our chances are good about, and that's going to shake out through March and April mostly, right? End of April we should have a pretty good idea on Transform 386 and our luck at the state, right?
I don't know how quick they'll get an answer. That's when we're
Yeah.
going to be submitting them.
April, May.
Right.
But in any regard, once we've seen how that plays out and what we can count on there, then I really think this council is going to have to come back and have really a strategy funding session moving forward. Because we don't know what the next years are gonna bring, and we gotta really explore what all the funding mechanisms could and couldn't be. FEMA probably by that time is gonna shake out a little differently and look differently. If the concept is to send that money back down to the states and let the states have more control, we're gonna have to see, like, what does that mean? If the state has a program where, okay, if your house flooded twice in the last 10 years, it's eligible for 75% to be purchased, and the city has to put up 25%, or whatever those kind of programs look like. That's where a lot of those projects like that, Lance,
Yeah.
that's where those make sense, you know, and
Yeah.
we went through something like that after '04 in the Woods subdivision. I think that was 75-25.
Yeah.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Yeah, where FEMA put up 75% of the funding, the city put up 25, and we acquired a lot of homes that we took out of the equation.
And guess what? It didn't really help anything.
Right.
You know,
But-
it didn't help anything as far as any other
no-
home.
But none of those homes flooded
Well,
in Ian or Milton,
yeah.
because they're not there, right?
Right.
So, you know, repetitive flooding homes in repetitive areas
Yeah.
are part of a real conversation to have, because like Juno spoke about for 3 hours tonight, realistically, not every property in Port Orange can be saved from a storm like Ian or a
Yeah.
storm like Milton. You have topography that is shaped like a bowl.
Yeah.
Homes were built back in the 60s and 70s where there is no retention, no network, no infrastructure anywhere in those areas to really help to that level. And then at some point you are going to come across, you know, it is going to come down to cost, right? I mean, if you had $1 billion to spend, you could do some really awesome things. But realistically, when you look at some of these projects, like I think Juno started to say earlier on a project, you know, it just doesn't make sense to try to design a project to stop 21 inches of rainfall in certain areas, because
Yeah.
it's just not going to happen. You
Yeah.
know, you're not going to get there. You'll never get there. You'll never have enough funding to get there. So, what I would say, Wayne, and chime in here, but I think strategically, we need to have a funding conversation so that we all better understand where are all the places we're going to try to go get funding. How much funding do we get within our own city? What opportunities would there be for bonds and grants and all those different kinds of things? You want to just maybe touch on that a little bit? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I mean, it's going to come down to funding.
And that's the thought process, and the reason why we were going to wait till May to start doing the more detailed meetings, is we want to make sure we've got all the numbers as good as we can get them, so that we can do exactly what Councilman Green was doing, where you're looking at cost per home, so that you can make that decision. So that's what we were planning to put together. Late May is when we do the capital improvements program workshop with council, where we would cover some of that. If it ends up being something that's big enough that it needs to be its own, we can do it standalone. But we'd give you, here's all the options that you have available to you to make these decisions. And just like you said, this is the pros and cons of bonds, pros and cons of going to grants, because you may just have to wait for a while to get there. So we'd be able to put here's all your financing options, and here's the costs and benefits of doing them that way.
Yeah.
I'd like to say a couple things if I could.
Jump in there.
I think we got to be really careful when we talk about cost per home, because we're talking about a $12 million project, but we're talking about a project that's going to last and benefit 30 plus years. So yeah, it's $12 million or it's $20 million, but that's a one-time cost that's going to improve that area for a very, very long time. And if you break it down to, I mean, if we did cost per home, I'd say no to all this, and let's just let the cards fall where they are, and let's see what happens, like's happening down in South Florida, where people are coming in, they're tired of flooding, they're selling their properties, and investors what they're doing is they're buying the whole neighborhood. Not one house, not two houses, they're buying blocks. And they're knocking them all down, and they're redeveloping today's standards, and they're getting a lot more money for that property. Now, I'm not saying people need to sell out. I hate to see that. These are lifelong homes, and I love the fact that people own a home and they live there for a long period of time. At some point, you got to decide, can I continue to do this? Do I make an investment and lift the home? Do I make an investment and rebuild the home, or do I just let it go? And the problem when the city buys the house, nothing can ever be built on it again.
Yeah, and it comes off tax roll.
So it comes off the tax roll, and now it's just a vacant lot sitting in the middle of the neighborhood. So at some point we have to look at, okay, the cost per home, what the benefit is, what the long-term benefit is, and is it just better to just let the cards fall where they are and let someone come in and say, look, I'm going to give you 250 for that house, and I'm going to give your neighbor the same, and I'm going to give the neighbor the same, and I'm going to own my own block, and I'm going to come back to the city and say, I want to redevelop the whole thing. I am witnessing this across the street from my parents' house right now in Fort Lauderdale, where a 2-acre lot that had a bungalow on it that flooded during the hurricanes, now it's 8 units. They're selling for $850,000 a piece, and that's part of redevelopment, and they're not going to flood. They're designed not to. So at some point, we do have to look at where do we just say, hey, we can't financially do this because we've got 50 other % of the people that live in this city that pay these tax dollars. And they got to say to us, hey, that's not a wise way to spend our tax dollars doing this. So we have to look at the big picture and funding. And I know that this city, and I'm confident in our engineer and our staff to go out and get grant money. I'm very, very impressed, and I want to share this with the public, with our city manager and our engineer when we went to Tallahassee. They were so prepared. They had us so prepared to present to the people that are making these decisions. Because ultimately, the governor and his Senate and his House, they make these decisions on where this money's going. They put together one heck of a presentation. I'm very impressed with that, and I thank you for that, because we felt very, very prepared. And our assistant city manager. So thank you so much. The presentation was incredible, but at the same day, we're looking at money and our tax dollars. And so.
Well, and I think to that, I think that's a great point. And I think to that too is that you're going to have to correlate the dollar to what we can really do. Like Juno's saying, these projects are being designed to this standard of about 12 inches. That means they're not going to stop an Ian. So if you put $17 million out for however many 20 properties, you have to knowingly do that and move forward down that path, knowing if it's a Milton and an Ian, that money didn't help. Those properties still got flooded.
Yeah.
Am I saying conceptually? Am I right on that, or correct me if I'm
No, I
wrong?
think conceptually you're correct, but I think that because we were so conservative with a lot of our estimates that we could probably handle more. Ian and Milton are going to be really difficult storms to handle no matter what we do, especially a storm like Milton, believe it or not, because of that kind of rainfall intensity. But in essence, you're correct with what you're saying, yes.
Yeah, so there'll
We
be a
have
lot
to
of
make-
there'll be a lot of variables, I think, with that conversation.
We have to do something.
So I want to
We're gonna do
ask
something.
you, and I want to touch on something that bothers me, okay? And it's the bureaucracy of the permitting process. Now, the mayor mentioned saying, reach out to Senator Wright and reach out to Chase. Is there somebody in these permitting processes that we can reach out to say, listen, you just don't have your own time frame to look at these permits or to get the. I mean, this seems to me like nobody cares beyond us that we need this permit to do this work. Is there something that citizens can do, or they can reach out to say, look, DEP or FWC or whoever, let's get this thing to the top of the list, or how does that work?
Well, that's not my area of expertise, but I would say that you're probably more beneficial to reach out to your elected officials at the state level, because then they're the ones that have the power to potentially enact permitting changes. The permitting agencies aren't doing anything purposely to slow these projects down. They have a set of standards and a set of rules that they have to permit by, just like our own permitting staff. We have a set of rules and standards that we have to permit by. So it really be up to the higher levels in the state government. And when you talk about the Army Corps of Engineers, then you're getting into the federal government.
But I'll give you an example. Is we made it a point in Port Orange to say, okay, if you had damage to your home from a hurricane, we're going to get you your permit, and it's not going to cost you nothing. We got it
Right.
out the door.
And
but it seems like in this situation, this is a critical situation,
Our-
straight up. All this flooding is a big deal.
Our local representative that we're working with at the Army Corps of Engineers has been very helpful to us.
Okay, that's what I wanna know.
So him as a person, he's doing everything that he can do to help us get through this thing as quickly as possible, because he understands the urgency, but he is still limited by the rules that he has to permit by.
Okay, I'm just.
Yeah, and I will say that I hope that there is a wind of change, so to speak, because years and years ago when we were talking about projects with the Nova Canal, for example, and getting the state on board and seeing some movement with the studies and stuff like that, there just wasn't a whole lot there. Now I think there is. I mean, there's, we heard that in Tallahassee. I think we're hearing that around the local network of elected officials, that the Army Corps of Engineers is re-engaging and kind of doing some studies with Daytona and things like that. And now I know that, the county, there's going to have to be a regional plan for these bigger scale things, the Nova Canal System, for example, or B19. I mean, it's got to come from higher levels. And it sounds like they're willing to have those discussions and do those studies to try to see what can be done to improve that. So I'm not so confident that was the case 8,
Well,
10,
I mean, you're
12
just saying,
years
you
ago.
look at these time frames,
Yeah.
and you got people out here that are rebuilt for the second time in 2 years, and we're 3 years away from a project, minimum.
And that's from one project, let
Yeah,
alone
and
all
that's
of
just
them.
one project. That's
Well, you
that's
got some of
frustrating to
them
me.
3 times since 2004.
Yeah, that's just frustrating to me because this is a critical situation.
I agree.
Not just in Port Orange, but all over the state.
I
So,
agree. Anything else for Junos?
no, thank you so much, man. You
Good
did a
job.
great job.
Anything for him?
Fantastic.
Tracy?
Lucky to have you.
Jump in there, Tracy. You've been writing down a bunch of notes, man. Let it fly.
These are notes for everybody.
Go ahead.
But June, I want to thank you. Very, very comprehensive. When Kimley Horn came in and they, this is going to sound bad, gave their spiel. Don't take that the wrong way. Gave the spiel. It's you want to come in here and be able to break it down to the general public so everybody knows exactly what we're talking about. All the councilmen have talked about this. It's dollars and cents, homes and things of that nature. And to give you all an idea, you're talking about dollars and cents. If we took the top 5 projects, not all 9 because it's budgetary, but top 5 projects that affects the most impact of homes and things of that nature, it's a tune of about $78 million. We've always talked about matching. If we can get the state to come in on that $78 million, because it takes years for us to get all the monies in place to begin with, that spits us out to about $39 million. I know somewhere between the properties and all the acquisitions and sales that we've had in the past, we could probably scratch out $9 million. That leaves us with about a $30 million tag right now, and we can go, Juno, you got this, go knock out 5 projects. What I'm suggesting, and I know we're not talking about votes and things that tonight, but on $30 million on a 20-year bond, on a 20-year note bond, is simple math. 30 million, 20-year bond, that's $1.5 million a year being paid back on a bond without interest. So I don't have the interest factored into that. This is just simple math. We have close to 25,000 residences and businesses inside the city. Just so y'all can keep that number in your head, that's $60 a year if we did a flat across the board to pay that note on a 20-year bond.
That makes sense because the people paying it, living here 20 years from now are helping pay it.
But we have a
Correct.
stormwater tax now.
We do. And that's the question of that stormwater tax, is how that gets distributed and what we're using it for. I'm not saying take it away from that. I know we talked about a incremental positioning of raise to those tax bases, but we're looking at a solution. How do we get here? How do we get to this next one to go, Juno, take your team and make it happen? It's understanding the brass tacks of things. Approximately $60 a resident is what we're talking about to make this happen without interest figured into it. Am I wrong?
You did 65,000 population, right? Or you're talking about units? Is it
Just
50,000
25,000 residents as far as homes, physical
Homes,
homes,
rooftops paying
that are
taxes,
paying
yeah.
property taxes.
And the stormwater fee, just to give you a little background on it, this is generalizing the broad number, but when we went through that, when we put the increase in, about 85% of it goes into projects, very little of it goes into staff. There's not that many people. And right now, we are sitting on a couple million of it we have to hold on to because that's our share of all those FEMA matches that are out there.
Right.
So that's about what we would have for projects. It does not generate, we don't have a savings account in it of huge amount of numbers to do capital. So it's pretty well used up by all the maintenance that he took you through, the people doing that, and then some of the smaller level projects. If we didn't have that money set aside for FEMA, you would have about 2 million, maybe 1 to 2 million a year that you could put into capital that would come back. But it's not gonna reach the levels to really be meaningfully helpful with these big $20 million projects.
Yeah, well, this is an addition to what we already got
Right,
going
right.
on.
So you would have to, like, as you said, you'd have to either choose debt or some other method.
And you're assuming you get all 50% matched.
And that's exactly, you'd have to have 50% match to make this happen.
Right.
But we're also talking about, we're fighting for dollars, and it's getting those dollars from those entities. They're not gonna come in and go, you guys look great in Port Orange, we're gonna do all 5 projects. You and I both know that's not gonna happen. But if they're doing 1 and 2 a year, it's gonna take you that long to get it through Army Corps of Engineers.
Hope not.
Anything else?
Yep, that's all.
Reed.
Juno, first off, great presentation. And thank you to Kimley Horn, everybody. This is what I was hoping for. It's better than I hoped, as far as feeling like I can look at this from a data-driven perspective and make decisions based on that. It's not, hey, I have this theory that if we dig this pond that it's going to be better. It's proven and scientific in some way, and so I'm very appreciative of that. I think this was a great investment, and we've learned a lot here. Funding wise, I think we ought to be very careful at trying to tag it down to price per home. It is everything when it comes to the government is financial. Someone has to pay for it, and it's us, our residents and our businesses, and so we're going to have to be very careful how we navigate these. But I also don't think we want to start immediately dismissing projects, because something that I learned tonight through this entire presentation is that there's some projects that you conservatively say will help 12 homes, right? And 12 million for 12 homes, I get, is ridiculous. It makes no sense at all. But there can be additional benefits, as we're finding, if something is adjacent to the Nova Canal or the B19, that would benefit possibly thousands of homes up the way. I appreciate the conservative estimate, and I like us being that way. I do think as we have to start making decisions financially as to which projects we want to pursue, especially which ones we want to pursue first, I think we're going to need maybe a little more detail and a little more range as to this. We feel really good about it helping this many, and there's a good chance for these, and there's a minimal chance for these. But I think it's going to have to be a little more rainbow, not black and white, because we're going to need that information. Otherwise, we're just going to sit here and say, well, 12 homes, 12 million, and all of us are going to look at each other like we can't go that way. And I don't want to go that way with it. I want to see all these projects get done if it makes sense, both financially and feasibility, and in terms of timelines and everything else. Wayne, were you about to say something? I saw you pull
Well,
it
I was just going to say, but one of the things that does help us bigger picture, so the basin studies that Juno was talking about, so the larger county studies of the whole basins, because if you look at what we showed you, not every part of the city has a project. So the B19 study comes in to lower the weir or build something else that's easier for the water to get through, stick some backflows on it, a lot easier to pay for that, helps the people in Willow Run. I know Willow Run's not the only name, there's 6 or 7 neighborhoods in that broad area, but it helps those areas. And going up B19, the big issue of what do you do with Nova Canal. So you mentioned a couple of the other neighborhoods that weren't in there, the ones in the little southern areas that are like Beacon Woods, that still run into the same problem. They gravity off into Nova and can't get anywhere. The extra outfall that we've been talking about, whether we work with the state and the federal government and the county to pay for something that we do off of Reed Canal, or we build another one that parallels Dunlawton and pushes it out. So some of these projects aren't going to just be on Port Orange's back. The idea would be to have regional projects where everybody's putting in, and our share may be a much more reasonable part of a big regional one. And you get something like that and an outfall off Nova, then you help a whole bunch of people doing that as well. And we're not the only ones writing the check for that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, the one thing I think of is, and we won't beat this to death much more tonight, like we're getting there on the funding part, but the one thing to keep in mind is you don't know what you don't know, right? So I think what you're gonna see evolve, because we've seen it in the past with FEMA dollars, is once you pass on something, you may own it all. So what I mean by that is hypothetically, you've got a project area and you've got a $15 million project, and the other government agencies that are involved in the funding look at it and go, okay, we're not supporting a $15 million project for $8 million in property, right? And so they may say, look, you had an opportunity. Here was this program where you could get 75% of the funding, you match it with 25, and you buy those properties, because they're no longer going to be insurable, because that's another mechanism that's going to have to be considered is could it even be insured again? Because I think you're seeing that happen now in discussions at the state level. You know, they're trying to figure out, because these insurance companies don't want to insure properties anymore like this. So anyway, it's going to get complex. It's going to be hard decisions. I think some of the I'm not sure the right term, but the valuation of, you know, a project area versus what the cost of the project is going to be part of that discussion as opportunities come available. And like I said, you know, President Trump, I think, has pretty much said right out, he wants to do away with FEMA. So there's going to be a new look, more than likely, of what that agency looks like, and whether that becomes more state controlled or how that shakes out. It's just something we're going to have to watch, because we're going to have to be fluid on that. We're going to have to adjust to that stuff. But
I think we may have an opportunity with the Elevate Florida concept, and Tim's guys have been doing a little bit more with it. But one of the challenges that the original CDBG or the FEMA projects was that the homeowner, if you just elevated, had to pay their 25%. So a typical house, that was like $35,000. So they would have to go mortgage another 30 grand on these houses to elevate them. So one, there's this stigma of, I don't want to have my house up on sticks in a neighborhood when other people don't. And then there's where am I going to get $30,000 when I've already got a damaged house to elevate it? So where Elevate came in is, one, speeds it up, and two, they were paying that match, so you didn't have to do it. So it may be in the long run, and so we're trying to come up with ideas here, is getting rid of some of the stigma and getting them to, because they're going to run out of money pretty quick in Elevate Florida, because you don't have to put the match into it. So maybe get the state on board to keep pushing that at that elevated. You pay for it, you do the price, and you're able to get 200 homes done that way instead of 40. And then you're able to focus on some of the bigger areas where you do have a cluster, like a Sleepy Hollow, where you know you're going to have to take 40 homes to all in one group to elevate, or that project seems to be way more of a cost benefit winner in a big way. So you know, if maybe that's approach is to try to make the one house at a time thing way more feasible for people in the long run, because it's like you said, if we buy them, we're stuck with a piece of land that's off the tax roll. We have to go mow it now all the time, so we've got to maintain this forever. If they own it and live in it, they get to stay in their neighborhood. Kids get to go to the same schools. They just have a house a little bit higher up. And if you're not having to come up with $30,000 to match to put it in there, maybe more people will do it, and that maybe that takes care of your areas where the big project just isn't as feasible.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there's going to be some creative solutions we can find. I think just as we go through this whole process, you know, yes, there are properties and there's homes and there's dollar signs and all that, but it's people's lives. And so we want to make sure we're just very careful with our tone and our approach, because we are talking about things, for a lot of people, it's their biggest investment. And so I just want to make sure we have to do what's right by our citizens, and we have to do the right thing from our seats, but we also are talking about people's entire livelihoods. We just want to be careful about how we approach it, and that we don't become cold and just strictly focused on just the numbers.
Well, we want to, over the next 3 to 4 years for sure, we want to aggressively pursue every dollar we can out there, because hopefully what will happen is we're going to go through a long period of time without a bunch of these crazy storms. But the reality with that will do is there will be less and less funding available, because it's a hot topic right now. When you have natural disasters, you see this infusion of funds from the federal governments down into the states. The states put more money up and all that kind of stuff. But then you go through those periods of times where those things aren't occurring, and there's other projects that start rising up, whether that's transportation or whatever in the state. And so we've seen that in the past. So the goal for now and the focus is, let's get as much as we possibly can, pursue everything we can, maximize every dollar. I think the stormwater plan, the modeling, gives us a lot of confidence
Yeah.
And the money that does need to be spent, that this will be very beneficial. You could see that in Tallahassee when we were talking that way, so.
But like you said, that we're not the only one there for the dollars. There's cities all over Florida that are
A
out there.
lot of
That-
the state.
that some are worse than
A
us.
lot,
It's true.
yeah, a
Very
lot,
true.
so. Anything else?
No,
You
thank
guys
you.
wanna touch on tonight? Are we good?
Kimberly Horn, thank you very much.
Junos, thank
Very
you
good.
very much. Thank
Very
you to
good,
all the
everyone.
staff, everybody that's played a role in this. We appreciate you guys.
Thank you.